Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Public Works for today, Wednesday, August 28th, 2019.
Commissioner Garcia, Cabello, James, Davis, and Caloza are present. President James, you do have a quorum. May we start with Bureau introductions, please, starting with Bureau of Street Services.
Good morning, Pamela Ostrander, Bureau of Street Services.
Good morning, Steffi Wiles, Bureau of Contract Administration.
Good morning, Gary Lee Moore, Bureau of Engineering.
Good morning, Marco Ruiz, Bureau of Sanitation.
Good morning, Asad Al-Najjar, Bureau of Street Lighting.
Good morning, Ted Jordan, Public Works General Counsel.
Fernando Campos, Executive Officer. President James, we do not have any speaker cards under general public comment. We do not have any commentary under the Neighborhood Council comment section as well. We did receive speaker cards on items number 1 for today's agenda.
Okay, we'll close general public comment as well as the Neighborhood Council category of commentary. I've got 2 meeting minutes for approval, Friday, August 2nd, 2019, and Monday, August 5th, 2019. Commissioner Cabello has seconded my motion that we approve those meeting minutes. Any objection? Without objection, we will approve those meeting minutes. Commissioner Garcia, you have a presentation this morning. Okay, we will start with you.
Good morning, colleagues, commissioners, Bureau representatives, Gary, who's here. It is an honor to be here today on this very special day, August 28, 2019, to celebrate and honor a very special, what is your current title right now? Because I know you just got a promotion.
Project Manager 1.
Project Manager 1. Our Project Manager 1 for the Bureau of Street Lighting, Asad Al-Najjar. Asad Al-Najjar has been with the city 30 years now, and we are very delighted that he's taken part. I know, we should give him a flag. 30 years serving the city of Los Angeles. He is an asset to the Bureau of Street Lighting, but not just that, he's also well-versed in the community. He attends neighborhood council meetings. Actually, you're part of the neighborhood, your local Porter Ranch Neighborhood Council. He attends and is representative of the Bureau of Street Lighting out in different community events as well. He has a long list of network also, not just in the Valley, but in LA, and he's just a delight to always be around. So if you know Asad, you'll know that we're always in a very happy mood, and he brings out his energy that just radiates throughout the whole room. So thank you for giving us 30 years of your fun, but not just fun, your professionalism, but your great attitude all around. Thank you, Asad. And so on behalf of the Board of Public Works, in recognition of your contributions and continued support to the Department of Public Works, we congratulate you on your 30 years of service to the city of Los Angeles. Thank you, Asad.
Thank you.
This is from us, this is from our board. I just also want to recognize that the City Council gave him a very beautiful certificate as well. So I know you can't see it out there, but it's a very beautiful.
Yeah, we can tell it's large.
Yeah, it's huge. It's very beautiful, too. Just for the audience. All right. Well, thank you very much, Asad, for being part of this. You want to speak a few words?
Well, should we go before Asad? Yeah, we'll go first. Okay, we'll go first.
Okay, there you go. So you stand here.
Commissioner Day, well, first of all, Asad, just to reference 30 years ago, so that would take us back to the 80s.
Yes.
1989, almost 1990, but 1989. Just gives everyone a sense of how long 30 years is. And this is just, and just so we're clear, this is just a 30-year recognition.
Yes.
There's no R word attached to the end of that. All right, good, thank you. That's okay, but I don't want anybody to be confused and to think that you don't have many more wonderful years with us if you so choose. Commissioner Davis.
Asad, I would like to congratulate you on having been here for 30 years. You are part of the brain trust of the city of Los Angeles in general, and in particular the Board of Public Works. You really are the face of the Bureau of Street Lighting, and it's always a pleasure to work with you. You're very knowledgeable, and we're so proud of the work and the leadership that you provide here in the great city, and we wish you 30 more great years right here in the city of LA. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis. Commissioner Cabello?
Thank you, President James. Congratulations, Assad. And thank you again. We're going to all basically say the same thing. We enjoy having you on the board. Congratulations for 30 years of service. It's no small feat, and we're so lucky to be the beneficiaries of those 30 years. And I just really enjoy sometimes watching you at board when you're the bureau rep for street lighting. You're always so engaged, even on non-street lighting matters. You're so interested. You make it really enjoyable. So that passion, the wisdom, and the years of experience really show through your presence. So thank you, and also happy birthday.
Thank you.
Oh, really? 30 years with with street lighting with the city of Los Angeles, and your 35th birthday. So, started young. That's right.
Exactly.
Yep, part of our internship program. Commissioner Caloza.
Thank you, President James. So I just want to echo what all my colleagues said. Thank you for 30 years of service to the city. Not only are you an amazing public servant, but you are just also an amazing human being. I always enjoy when I get the opportunity to sit with you, and you just, again, are a wealth of knowledge and just truly, a really bright light when, we have some difficult meetings. You're always keep everything really lighthearted and really are just, again, a true public servant and, really think about community and the city and the board first. And, we are so appreciative of that. And like what my Commissioner Cabello said, happy birthday, and thank you for bringing us baklava on Monday. I really appreciated it. That was amazing. So I thank you again, and street lighting is really lucky to have you, and the department's really lucky to have you.
Thank you, Commissioner Caloza. And so let me just say, we on occasion are able to honor a number of people that reach these significant milestones in their careers with the city. And it's always a great thing when we do, and it's that institutional knowledge that is so important in the success of running the second largest city in the United States. But we don't always get to know them as well as we know you. You spend more time with the board than a lot of people do. And that's a benefit for us. We hope it's a benefit for you as well. But it's always, it's just a different level of special for us when it's someone that we know as well, because we spend time with you 3 days a week, often many weeks. And I would only add substantively to what my colleagues have said, is that it's always a level of comfort for us, and there's a sense of confidence when you are here for street lighting, because any of the questions that come up, you always are very well prepared to know the answer to, and that's always something that enables our board to rest easy when we're in this position. So congratulations, thank you for your stellar career with the city of Los Angeles, and we look forward to many more years to come, and happy birthday.
Thank you.
And with that, I will leave the floor to you, sir.
Thank you, President James. Good morning, commissioners, colleagues, and it's a great milestone for me, the 3055 at the same week, and it's like only yesterday I started. But I take this opportunity to thank the whole board and all my colleagues at the other bureaus. Of course, special thanks to our director, Norma Sahakian, and our assistant director, Megan Hackney. They are always, guiding me through. And also, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mayor Garcetti and the whole council for the surprise certificate too. And it's going to make me motivated to even work harder. Probably I'll do another 5 years. I'll target 40 years, but probably I'll retire at 35. And I thank you really for all this recognition. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Assad. Yeah. So if we could take just a couple of quick photos. We'll just take a minute recess. I think, Assad, you have someone here that's special as well.
I have my special daughter here with me, my oldest. Her mom couldn't make it. They have a meeting to do with the Purple Line, so she couldn't make it. Yeah.
Okay, returning to our agenda this morning, let's go to agenda item number 2. Number 1 is our hearing that's going to take a bit of time. Agenda item number 2 is a request for proposals, recycling and/or disposal of various materials and debris, recommending that the board authorize the director of the Bureau of Street Services, Streets LA, to distribute and advertise the attached request for proposals. That's transmittal number 1. For recycling and/or disposal of inert materials, mixed debris, waste debris, white goods, bulky items, and construction and demolition materials. Secondly, authorize the Director of Streets LA to review the proposals and select the vendors. And third, instruct the Director of Streets LA to return to the Board of Public Works with recommendations to award and execute contracts with the selected vendors. Ms. Ostrander.
Good morning. Pamela Ostrander with Bureau of Street Services. In 1989, the state of California enacted Assembly Bill 939, which entitled called the California Integrated Solid Waste Management Act. It required that municipalities reduce the quantities of solid waste being disposed of in landfills. Pursuant to Assembly Bill 939, the city prepared a source reducing and recycling element with strategies to reduce, reuse, recycle, and compose solid waste materials. So most of the solid waste materials are generated by Streets LA consist of the inert materials and mixed inert materials, which consist of mainly, asphalt, pavement, concrete, a combination of sand, dirt, rebar, and some wire mesh. And those combination of those materials are already recycled into new asphalt for the cities, but in our contracted suppliers. For the materials that are not recycled by the city, we're required to use a private sector facility to properly dispose of and legally dispose of these materials for recycling. So this specification before you for the request for proposal was developed in accordance with the city's waste management policies to reuse and recycle to the greatest extent feasible prior to the disposal in landfills. Although the Bureau of Sanitation and Department of General Services have similar disposal contracts, an independent contractor is required to meet the specific material disposal needs unique to the daily operations of Streets LA. So Streets LA wishes to contract with vendors who have the capacity and the resources to properly and legally receive and properly dispose of these and recycle these materials. These materials will be delivered to the sites by the city and by our contract truckers to the facilities determined to be the most appropriate and efficient as determined by the city. So Streets LA intends to award multiple contracts to vendors with sites located all over the city and its facility. So that's what this request for proposal is for.
Thank you, Ms. Ostrander. I would only, if you mentioned this, I missed it. The debris, bulky items, construction, demolition materials. A term that is used in the industry, though, is the term white goods. I think it's helpful to define that for the record, people that might be listening in the future. Stoves, refrigerators, dishwashers.
Correct.
Yeah, things like that, appliances and such.
Right, things that we come across. That's basically what it is. Should be defined as stoves, refrigerators, dishwashers, washing materials, dryers, and air conditioners.
Okay, great. Any questions at all for the distribution of the RFP? Motion made by Commissioner Cabello. I'll second it. Any objection? Without objection, we'll adopt agenda item number 2. Thank you, ma'am. Any issue sending number 2 forthwith? We'll send number 2 forthwith.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. That'll be the order on number 2. Agenda item number 1. Let me call the item. Mr. Sachs, did you put in a card on number 1? Okay. Agenda item number 1, Bureau of Engineering, hearing of appeal, certified claim number 2, revision 1, task order package number 4. Viaduct foundations for the 6th Street Viaduct Replacement Project. The federal project number is in the agenda notice. Recommending that the board find that Skanska, Stacy, and Whitbeck, a joint ventures, appeal to the board their claim, which was filed on behalf of SSW, that's Skanska, their subcontractor, Condon Johnson and Associates Incorporated, for differing site conditions and extra work lacks merit and that SSW is not entitled to any additional compensation or extension of time. This is an appeal of the recommendation or the denial of the claim by the Bureau of Engineering. Mr. Sachs on number 1.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. For the record, Arnold Sachs, and I hope everybody is doing well. This item has been before you a few times, and I just came from Metro, and they have a new program, Reimagine. So, Reimagine if, like this says here, a federal project. This is the first time I ever read about a federal project number for this project. So who exactly would be in charge of this project in this city? We have the federal government project. We have the city project. We have Metro part of the project with the railroad tracks. We probably have some county government in here because there's so much money floating around. Who exactly has the oversight? And if all these different government entities, reimagine this, if all these different government entities got together and sat down and said, you know what, we want to build this bridge, we want to redo this bridge, but we want to make a lot of money, how will we do this? Well, we'll make all these different changes, and this guy will answer to that one, and that guy will answer to that one, and this guy will answer to this one, and this guy will answer to no one. And so you get these reimagined ideas floating around, but nobody really has authority. And the only thing that gets burned up here, other than your temper, is money. We need better leadership. We need more people involved in listening to what's going on in their city so they have an idea of what's going on in their community. Because communities build cities, and cities build what? Cities build for the future. And so it's good to build for the future as long as you have a plan. But who has the plan here? The federal government, the city, the county, Metro? I don't know. I just come to these meetings and ask these stupid questions. And
2
I
minutes.
appreciate the board listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sachs. So for our hearing on agenda item number 1, let me kind of go over the process. And I'll go over the process and then any of the, we have our city engineer present. Thank you, sir, for being here. Any other of the Bureau reps who would like to stay for the hearing, you're welcome to do so as always. But if you would like to go back to your day other than the Board of Public Works hearing, you're welcome to do that as well. We will start this morning with the presentation by the appellant. They will explain their appeal. Then we will hear, and I know that we've put a time limit on it. Our time limits for real parties in interest are soft time limits. If you need more, if you need more time, take more time. If you're able to do it in less time than we've allotted, that courtesy is always appreciated. The only thing that I ask of folks that present in front of us on these hearings is if you begin to repeat yourself, then it'll be time to move on to the next topic. After we hear from the appellant, and I understand it's going to be representatives from Condon Johnson Associates. There is a representative, the project manager from Skanska, here for questions if necessary. After that, we will hear from the Bureau of Engineering from Ms. Allen. And then we will allow rebuttal, and we might even allow rebuttal from the Bureau of Engineering, depending on how the issues have played out and whether or not it is deemed necessary. So let's go ahead and start with either George Burrow or Stephen it looks like Bonita. It's really up to the two of you how you want to present, in what order you'd like to do it. Again, the only thing I'd ask is, are you Mr.
George Burrow.
Okay, Mr. Burrow. It's fine if you divide up the presentation, but it's not helpful if the second presenter says the same thing that the first presenter says. The floor is yours, sir,
Thanks.
and welcome.
George Burrow with Condon Johnson here to talk about our claim on Task Order 4, the 6th Street Bridge replacement. So the claim really breaks down into 3 key disputed items. One is a differing site condition. There's 2 parts of that differing site condition. One is the project-wide Lower Fernando Formation, and the second is an abundance of boulders. The second key item is unanticipated access constraints, mainly across the railroads. And the third key item is directed extra work, primarily associated with Bent 10L, where we were directed to backfill a shaft, only to re-excavate and build it to its original tip elevation. So the first item, the differing site condition in the Lower Fernando. The initial adverse encounter of this condition was at Bent 11 right. When we encountered it there, the casing became stuck at the completion of shaft excavation about 150 feet down. The cause of getting stuck at the time was unknown. The foundation report provided does not indicate that swelling of the Lower Fernando should be anticipated. That material is described as a hard, stiff clay or soft claystone or siltstone rock. Expansion testing of the Lower Fernando was not provided in the geotechnical information provided on the project. We hired Group Delta consultants to provide an independent third-party analysis of the Lower Fernando's ability to swell during CIDH installation. CIDH is cast-in drilled hole pile. Group Delta performed the testing, commented on the test results and their experience with the Lower Fernando, and they concluded that the Lower Fernando has a medium expansion potential. When exposed to water during excavation, swelling occurs. The swelling can generate significant stress at the soil shaft interface, which is capable of gripping the sides of the casing. And that gripping is in excess of the machine's capacity to rotate the casing. A soil plug, which was required on the project after an incident on Bent 10L, prohibits lateral expansion of the soil, increasing lateral stresses against the casing, and that the city's directive to change the pile installation plan, a clear dictation of means and methods, resulted in a condition in which the pile became practically inconstructible. The impact of the city's new directive to maintain the soil plug, which was not required during construction of the test pile, demonstrates the engineer's lack of understanding of the nature of the Lower Fernando, which is the swelling that occurs when water is introduced. I think I might have missed a slide. Yeah, sorry about that. So the effects on the pile installation with the Lower Fernando, which was throughout the entire project, is that our approach to the job completely changed. We had to attempt to continuously rotate the casing once we got into the Lower Fernando so that it wouldn't become stuck. This led to numerous unplanned shifts, extra crews, in an attempt to keep the casing rotating. The tempering casing did get stuck at multiple locations, initially Bent 11 right, Bent 8 left, and Bent 4 left. The pile installation was modified at Bents 5 and 6 to preclude the possibility of the casing getting stuck. And the pile installation was modified at Bent 12. The second differing site condition encountered was an abundance of boulders. The borings state that gravel ranging from 3/4 to 2 inch in diameter and cobbles would be encountered. The boulders were observed and documented by the city's on-site inspection when we were excavating the shafts. The geotechnical baseline report establishes the baselines for geotechnical conditions anticipated to be encountered during underground and subsurface construction. The report establishes the basis for identification of changed site and ground conditions. And that's straight from the definitions and the general conditions on the project. They also state that the geotechnical data report contains factual information that was gathered during exploration and design. It may include logs of borings, test data, geologic, seismic, or environmental data. The geotechnical baseline report states that boulders were not encountered and could be present. The general disclaimers in the contract do not provide a basis for the owner to deny this differing site condition. There were no borings performed at the center of each pile, which is actually a requirement of the specifications on this project. There was no effort made by the city to quantify the extent of the possibility of encountering boulders. Because the boulders were encountered, the temporary casing became stuck at bent 8 right, causing damage to the casing, and required substantial time, 8 days, and effort to regain the casing rotation. Actually, a different machine had to be brought in to get the casing to rotate. The temporary shoring installation at bent 6 right and left required additional time to drill, backfill, and then re-drill after a substantial access delay. There was an increase in duration and costs, and it should be noted that the borings at those bends indicate 0 boulders. The data that's referenced in the geotechnical report, which is to say that those borings will show boulders, the statement out of the report. There are no boulders shown in the borings at those pile locations. Steve's going to talk about the access constraints at the railroad.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, thanks for your time. My name's Stephen Bonita. I was the project manager on the job. Just real quick question. Since it is a 6th Street Bridge marquee job, did anybody go out and see the foundation equipment when we were out there and actually see the beginning?
We don't answer questions, sir. You go ahead. You can talk to BOE regarding that.
So what we had planned was the magnitude of the equipment is significant. We're talking 450-ton cranes, 3 sections of rebar cages, multiple hours of splicing rebar cages, and 400 to 500 yards of concrete. So what we had anticipated with the contract document saying that the contractor could rely on railroad timetables and access through the river, we anticipated that in order to comply with the specification requirement to construct the pile as expeditiously as possible, that the agreements in place with the railroad would allow that, as well as the communication and coordination with the Army Corps and the access through the riverbed. So the construction of the pile is not an activity that can simply be started and stopped without an adverse impact to the construction. So when we got to the point of submitting a plan, we had informal meetings and communications with the railroads, specifically UPRR, who said you cannot cross our railroad for any extended period of time. SCARA was reasonable to deal with, but we basically had UPRR who was completely blocking access and wouldn't coordinate to provide that. So our initial plan, after that communication died down, was to come in through the riverbed. As the work progressed, the work was actually going to occur in the winter months, which put the project at risk of unpredictable, unreliable water flow, which actually occurred with the releases from the dams upstream. So in order to comply with the Army Corps permit requirement to vacate the river, if you will, the event would have caused a lot of adverse impact in construction and delay. So we ended up submitting an additional plan to go through the railroad and coordinated those events. We still had, on occasion, UPRR would just block a train or block access, and there were multiple occasions where the river flow was impeding access through the river. So essentially there were times where access was completely cut off and the pile was partially constructed. So when you're talking about the ability to foresee this at bid time and you're relying on a document that says to coordinate with the railroad timetable, at Bend 6 on the west side of the job, there is no railroad timetable. UPRR has a yard. SCARA has a couple of lines that have a non-timetable access. At Bend 5, when we came to work at Bend 5, the permanent retaining wall was delayed because of a differing site condition that I don't know whether you're aware or not. So access to Bend 5 was pushed into the winter months yet again, and then we fell under the C&M agreement for BNSF, which said absolutely no work in the fourth quarter of any year. So the work had to be resequenced, and then when we resequenced and eventually got over to Bend 5, it was in the middle of the winter, in January, in February, when river flow again releases from dams and rain events. So we had to actually have access from both the rails, multiple rail lines, and the riverbed in order to build the pile. One of the piles was significantly affected because the railroad had an accident, and we ended up on the day of concrete pour, the railroad timetable was not a reliable timetable because there was an accident and trains were diverted through the job site. So unfortunately we had the shaft excavated, the casing in the hole, the rebar cage in the hole, and we had to delay a couple of days in order to get concrete from a supplier that can't turn around and provide it every day. So those are the access constraints that we had in trying to construct the pile. I think that's it. Thanks for your time.
So the last key item to talk about is directed extra work. When we were constructing the first pile on the project, which was Bent 10L, there was surface settlement of about 16 inches in what was classified as loose fill material. The cause of the settlement was unknown at the time. The city at the time directed that the shaft be abandoned, backfilled, and re-excavated at a later date after they had time to assess what had happened. The Task Order 4 approved pile installation plan that we prepared, the means and methods of building the job, was required to be amended to conform to what were hypothetical calculations and assumptions based on observed quantities as less full and not very full. This is during the shaft excavation. And then later, they directed that the shaft be extended an additional 20 feet. While this was going on, we were communicating with the city that we needed to complete the shaft, and if there was any issue with the soil around the shaft, it could easily be repaired with compaction grouting at a very low cost. Eventually, the shaft was backfilled, abandoned, and in the end, weeks later, the shaft was re-excavated and constructed to its original pile tip elevation with no changes. And we performed compaction grouting around the pile at a very low cost. And there was no grout take around the pile. We were unable to improve the soil around the pile because the soil essentially was not loosened. At the end of all that, there was a significant cost and time impact to Kahn & Johnson for being directed to abandon that shaft, which was completely unnecessary. Also adversely impactful from that event was the new requirement of a soil plug. The city knew that no amount of plug was required to construct the CIDH piles per the specifications. The city observed and accepted the test pile, which was constructed without a soil plug, and then reapproved Condon Johnson pile installation plan for production piles, which was essentially the same as the test pile. The city later said that the soil plug is standard practice. The city did not provide a reference or a spec requirement, quantify the plug, or provide an analysis of the soil plug effect on pile installation. The first CIDH pile constructed after implementing those changes, which was bent 10 right, required 2 additional days to excavate. The additional time was experienced to varying degrees throughout the project. Group Delta wrote a memorandum dated September 14, 2017 regarding the adverse effects of the soil plug and the expansive clay of the lower Fernando. And later, Group Delta concluded that the CMP settlement, the settlement at the top of Bent 10L, was not due to the lack of a soil plug. The directed extra work effects on the pile installation increased the probability that the temporary casing would get stuck throughout the project in the lower Fernando. They increased the pile construction duration and caused damage to the equipment. That's all we've got right now. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Any questions before we move to the Bureau of Engineering? Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Ms. Allen? Just a quick note. Dr. Campos and Mr. Jordan, we are making a determination on the merit of the claim, and because there was not a discussion necessarily of specific dollar figures. If we make a determination, Mr. Jordan, let me just backtrack a little bit. It's a little bit like deciding whether or not there's liability. So if there's merit to the claim, then we will determine where the merit is and what the relief, what the monetary relief might be. If no merit is found, then you don't get to the damages phase, for lack of a better term, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so just so we're all clear, that's why we're not talking numbers yet, and that's why you did not hear specific numbers from the appellant at this point. It's based on the merits first. Ms. Allen.
Good morning, Julie Allen, Bureau of Engineering. I'm the program manager for the 6th Street Viaduct Replacement Project. As was noted in the report, the Bureau is recommending that the board find that the claim has no merit and determine that SSW, Skanska, Stacy, and Whitbeck, is not entitled to any compensation or extension of time associated with the claim. So during my presentation, I'm going to go a little bit into the background of the task order and the scope of work that was performed. And in the rebuttal section, we would be able to take a deeper dive into some of the technical issues as needed that will demonstrate how the contractor's performance actually contributed to a lot of the challenges that they encountered. I also wanted to highlight the fact that the city's contract is with the prime, Skanska, Stacy, and Whitbeck, and not with Condon Johnson, who did the presentation today. And some of the items that I bring up that relieve the city from liability, that's due to our contract with the prime, and if they have not addressed that responsibility and delegating to their sub, that's between the prime and their sub and not with the city. I'm just presenting what the city's position is based on our contract with the prime. So I'll begin with...
And I'm sorry, Ms. Allen. Mr. Jordan, that would be your advice or recommendation would be consistent with what Ms. Allen just put on the record, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I will begin with an overview of Task Order 4, which is the foundations package. The scope of work that was assigned or awarded to SSW was to install 23 cast and drilled hole piles. These are about 10 foot in diameter, averaging 160 feet in depth, and also to do the abutments. The total award amount was $24.1 million, and Condon Johnson's component of that, they were bid listed for $6 million to do the drilled shaft component. The contingency amount for the task order was $1.2 million. To date, the city did issue about 300,000 in change orders. These were for other differing site conditions that the city did find entitlement for. When the contractor encountered contaminated water and soil during the excavation, the city acknowledged that and compensated the contractor for those impacts. For the schedule, this package was awarded July 29th of 2016, and all of the CIDH foundations were completed by February of 2018. There is some small remaining work under package 4 that the prime contractor will be performing once the false work is down from the viaduct. For a summary of the claim, the total claim with the revision 1 is at just over $6 million, and the Condon Johnson component of that claim is $5.4 million. As they summarized in the presentation to you, the claim was broken up into 2 primary categories of differing site conditions and changed work, and extra work directed by the city. I won't go into too much detail because they provided the summary of their claim to you previously, so I'll be going into more detail about each of these issues later.
Although I do think it's helpful for the oral record that's being made, Ms. Allen. They don't have it necessarily
True. Okay.
this in front of you.
I'd be happy to
just to go through the same 3. You may have them in different order, but it's essentially the same 3 that was referenced by, yep.
That's correct. So they indicated that they encountered boulders that they did not expect. They mentioned that the expansion of the lower Fernando Formation caused the casing to seize and required constant rotation. And they indicated that access in the railroad rights-of-way were limited and caused delay. And the extra work that they indicated was directed by the city was directing to backfill an excavated hole after subsidence or settlement occurred, that they were required to maintain a soil plug, and required to maintain 10 feet of head above the tip of casing, and finally to mitigate for the disturbed soil and for concrete anomalies. For an overview of the timeline, this will be important later as I go through the city's position on the claim. The CIDH construction began in October of 2016, and for Bents 10 and 11, it was completed by December of 2016. Bents 7 through 9 and 12 followed from December of 2016 through March of 2017, followed later by Bent 6, 5, and 4 through the rest of 2017 and into February of 2018. For a timeline of their change order requests, the first time a change order request was submitted, and this was just for Bents 10L, 10R, and 11R, that was April 26th of 2018, and you'll note that that was probably about a 16-month time lapse from when the Bents 10 and 11 were constructed. That follows with the city's rejection of that initial change order request, and the city rejected that change order request due to lack of compliance with the contract timing requirements, and I'll explain that more in detail, and the fact that there was no merit for the technical issues in the claim. SSW followed with a certified claim for $4.4 million in June 18th of 2018, and at this time they supplemented the claim by including Bent 4 and Bent 7 through 12. So these weren't submitted as separate change order requests. Instead, they just kept supplementing the claim that had previously been submitted. In July 17th of 2018, the city denied the certified claim due to lack of compliance with the contract and the fact that there was no merit. In January 9th of this year, SSW submitted a revision to the claim, now in the amount of $6 million, now including impacts from Bents 5 and Bent 6, railroad access primarily. February 9th of 2019, the city denied that revised supplement to the claim, and on February 26th, SSW appealed it to the board, and that's carried us to the hearing today. So before I get into the city's specific reasons for denying the claim, I wanted to highlight contractual requirements that our contracts have and that were included in this particular contract under the general conditions section. And I'm not going to read these in detail because I break them down in summary later, but essentially the contract requires for any differing site condition or change in extra work, the contractor has 24 hours to submit a written notice to the city that differing site condition or changed extra work is encountered. And then they also have a requirement to submit within 20 days the written summary of the costs and the breakdown of what the costs are for that particular incident that was encountered. And importantly, the contractor, it's noted, waives their right to any compensation for time or cost if they if they've not met those requirements. So I'll go into a little more detail on those issues later as well. So the first reason the city denied the claim was for failure to comply with the timing and document procedures set forth in the general conditions. As I mentioned, there are two sections in the general conditions, and both of these have a statement that says that failure to strictly comply with the above requirements shall be deemed a waiver of claim for cost and time impacts. So as a note, the contractor had approximately 11 days for each notice that was provided. If you add up the different occurrences that they indicated were different site conditions, it took them an average of 11 days to submit a written notification, as opposed to the 24 hours that it's required in the contract. And this notice is important because it gives the city the opportunity to participate in the incident that's occurred, to investigate, and to ideally find solutions to help mitigate the problem. As far as the 20 calendar days that the contractor has to submit a written cost quotation, the first cost breakdown occurred 16 months after the incident occurred. So that was not even in the realm of the 20 days, nor did the contractor ask for a request to have us extend that period of time that they were having difficulty putting the cost information together, as they have done on other change orders for this project. In some cases, the contractor has asked for an extension, and the city has granted additional time if necessary for the contractor to still meet the conditions of the contract. We'll move on. So in addition to denying the claim based on the contractor's lack of compliance with the contractual procedures, we also analyzed the technical merit of the claim and have determined that there is no merit to any of the differing site conditions issues that they brought up. As an overview, the city's position is that the soil conditions that the contractor encountered while drilling the foundations was exactly as what was described in the contract. There was no differing site condition. It wasn't a change in soil type. It wasn't a big dinosaur bone. It wasn't anything different than what we had told them to expect as they were building the work. There was no evidence demonstrated that the conditions that they encountered differed materially, which is important contractually, from the material that they were expected to find. There was no evidence that the challenges that they encountered of the casing getting stuck or the settlement was tied in any way to what they're saying is a differing site condition. So just because a casing seized, it doesn't mean that there's a differing site condition. You have to show evidence that a differing site condition caused the challenges that they encountered. And these last two are related more to our contract, again, with the prime contractor, SSW, than with Condon Johnson. But the claim itself that we received did not acknowledge that the contractor included, as part of the CMGC, or Construction Manager General Contractor contract, a risk register, which is part of this contracting mechanism where they have identified risk that they have accepted the responsibility to mitigate. They are compensated to mitigate this risk. And if this risk is encountered, it doesn't matter whether the cost is exceeding what they were mitigated, or the cost that they received to mitigate it, or if it doesn't occur at all, they get the same amount of money. So it's like a contingency pot that they have, and they have to mitigate the risk.
And when you say they, you mean the prime contractor?
The prime contractor, that's correct.
Go ahead.
And this is just an overview, so I'll get into a little bit more detail later. The last item is that the claim did not acknowledge that it was the contractor's responsibility, again, the prime contractor, as identified in our contract language, which I'll show later, to negotiate, or coordinate, I should say, to coordinate with the railroad agencies to obtain the proper access they needed for construction. So this was something that the prime should have been handling, and that's not, because they had issues with the sub, that shouldn't come back to the city. All right, so now I'll get into a little bit more detail. For the first incident that occurred was at Bent 10 Left, and while they were drilling just over 100 feet deep, the equipment on top of the hole and the casing, everything dropped down and settled, and that was the incident that they were originally calling a differing site condition. However, they considered it to be a shallow differing site condition with no backup.
I'm sorry, would you hold one moment?
Absolutely.
Okay, would you start that section again on the failure to present evidence?
Sure.
Yep, go ahead.
So the first incident that was encountered by the contractor when drilling was at Bent 10 left, and what happened is when they were drilling about 100 feet deep, the equipment, the casing, everything just dropped a couple of feet, and they stopped work, and they had indicated that they thought it was likely a shallow settlement that occurred, but our geotechnical engineer went out to the site. Well, they were on site during the drilling event, but they performed additional investigation of the soil that came out of the hole. They did test drillings for us around the casing, and they made the determination that it was actually a deeper settlement that had occurred, and have expected that this occurred because the contractor was excavating below the tip of the casing. So we haven't really gone through it here, but the casing is basically like a hollow can, like if you'd assume a tin can with both ends removed, and they basically rotate it and push it into the ground, and then they scoop the soil out and remove it. After the soil is removed, they scoot it down the next layer, they add another casing and continue. That's the process all the way till they get to the bottom. And once they get to the bottom, they put a steel cage inside, they pour concrete, and then the casing is removed. It doesn't stay in place, but it needs to be holding up the soil the entire length of the excavation so that you don't get caving. If you dig below where your casing is, then you can get caving on the bottom. So sorry for the long explanation, but I thought it might be helpful so you understand what the process is. So what our geotechnical engineer, who's here with me and will be able to provide more detail during the rebuttal, he indicated that it appeared that they were excavating below the hole and that we had some settlement that occurred, and they were basically scooping soil out from the bottom that was caving in from outside the casing. And this settlement eventually traveled up to the surface and everything settled down. So our position, the city's position, based on the evidence that he can provide a little more detail on, was that there was no differing site condition. Essentially, the contractor caused the settlement through their actions and installation methods, and there was no differing site condition. Another component is that the contractor at the time was determined they weren't maintaining a 10-foot of fluid head, and what that means is they're digging below the groundwater table. So at 50 feet below ground, that's when there's water everywhere below that level, and they were about 50 feet below that, and they're required to keep 10 feet of water inside the casing above the groundwater inside the ground so that the water keeps pressure inside the casing hole. So if you get water lower than the outside water, everything tends to want to flow into the lower pressure, and so the water comes in, the soil comes in, and that contributes to having caving inside the casing. And that also in this particular location was found that the water level was too low and contributed to caving inside. So the next issue was that they had encountered boulders, and it was an abundance of boulders is what they described. But the city's position based on the contract documents is that boulders, dense ground, and debris were indicated to be expected by the contractor, and I'll, in the next page, give a little bit more information about that. So just for reference, so people know boulders or cobbles or what that means, this is from a USGS source. Cobbles are generally anything 2.5 to 10 inches in diameter, and boulders are anything larger than 10 inches. And on the right side of the slide, and I'll read it for the oral record, were excerpts from our geotechnical report. During site investigations, difficult drilling conditions were encountered throughout the project area due to dense, oversized materials such as gravels, cobbles, and possibly boulders in the alluvium and Upper Fernando Formation. The contractor should be prepared to deal with these conditions. Another excerpt. The contractor should be prepared to deal with these difficult drilling conditions, including the potential for encountering oversized cobbles and boulders. And the last note is important because the sampling that's done for a geotechnical investigation is a small diameter, small diameter equipment that you lower into the ground to take samples of the soil. So if you hit a boulder, it's not going to suck a boulder into a 2 or 4 inch diameter tube. You can't get a boulder out of it. What you get is refusal, like you'll hit something and you'll have to move it to another location. Or in this case, they indicated that they found fragments of larger rocks, which is an indication to them that these larger rocks chipped off of boulders, or these larger fragments. So they indicated that fragments of larger rocks and sampling refusals indicate that cobbles and possibly boulders are present. So this is the only type of information you can get from a geotechnical investigation, because you don't open up the ground to see what's down there. You can only take samples. So they were very clear in our geotechnical report that they hit refusal, there were obstructions, and that the contractor is required to expect to encounter boulders and cobbles as part of their excavation. And the amount that was found during installation was very small. It wasn't like every hole you're hitting a lot of boulders. What was submitted to us in writing was like 4 boulders on one of the bents and a couple boulders, and they weren't Volkswagen boulders. They were a couple of feet, sometimes less than a foot. So everything that was found was well within the expectations of the geotechnical report. The next item I wanted to cover was the Lower Fernando Formation. As I mentioned earlier, the material encountered by the contractor was exactly what the city expected that they would find. The Lower Fernando Formation was found at the elevations it was expected to find, and it was the same material that the contractor had actually witnessed at our geotechnical engineers firm. There was a pre-bid meeting that they were required to attend, and they actually witnessed and physically interacted with the soil that was brought out of the pile. So they were very familiar with the material. They did not provide evidence that the encountered material was anything different than what was in the contract. Instead, they indicate that it swelled, and that wasn't indicated to be what this material would do. But our report indicates that it's a clay material, and that a clay material, if you're knowledgeable about soils, has the potential to swell. It was already wet underground, so there's no surprise in how this material reacted, nor that any kind of swelling had any impact on the casing. The casing had other issues that we can cover in the rebuttal, but there's no indication that any swelling, if it did occur, was what caused the problems that they encountered. The last thing is that they had noted in their Group Delta report, which is the geotechnical firm they hired, that the material was dry, and when it became wet during excavation, that's what caused it to swell. But our geotechnical data shows that the material was already saturated prior to excavation, so there was no encountering of water as part of the process. It already was wet. It was below the groundwater table, and it was saturated, so there was no opportunity for it to become wet and swell. The next item is the risk register I mentioned before. Within this slide, I've included the actual language that was included in our contract. I'll read it hopefully quickly. The contractor shall provide a risk register to identify items of risk and associated costs not considered during the CMGC construction direct cost estimating process. The risk register shall be very specific regarding the identified risk, the possible risk realization, and the management of the risk with a detailed risk statement. The contractor shall assume all risk for the specified issues identified in the risk register. A cost contingency associated with the most likely cost and probable risk will be negotiated and awarded to the contractor to mitigate the identified issues. The contractor will not receive any additional compensation should costs exceed the awarded contingency. So the contractor did include an item in the risk register called difficult drilling, and that is the language that they wrote to describe that risk was the contractor may encounter difficult drilling conditions due to obstructions, soil and water conditions, and other drilling challenges. This risk item covers all associated cost and time impacts due to resolving difficult drilling operations, including but not limited to difficult soil and water conditions and obstructions up to 2 feet in diameter. So in our estimation, even if they determined that there was some challenge that they encountered due to the type of soil they encountered, which is what we told them to expect, this risk register from the prime would absolve the city of all responsibility to mitigate any challenges that they encountered due to difficult soil or water conditions. The next item is the failure in the claim to acknowledge the contractor responsibility for railroad coordination. In this slide, I've quoted the language that was included in our contract with the prime, and it says that the contractor shall work within the constraints and restrictions as defined in each construction and maintenance or C&M agreement. The contractor shall prepare for and submit for approval all documents requested by the railroad agencies to ensure compliance with the C&M agreement, including but not limited to clearances, track protections, working hour restrictions, access coordination, and repair of damages. The contractor is responsible for all coordination activities and will not be entitled to any claims related to the delay of work due to lack of coordination or timely submittals with any of the railroad agencies. It's the city's position that the SSW failed to obtain the necessary access that was needed. They also didn't note that they had an approved site access work plan, and a day before they planned to start work, they changed their mind and decided to work with more access needed from UP Railroad and SCARA, and the railroads had to go through another round of review to use the new access method across the tracks. And also noting that in the RFP that was issued for the drilling subcontractors, it was noted that they were supposed to expect 6-hour working windows at night only and weekends, and what the railroads actually offered to them for working as cited in the claim was more than what they had been directed to anticipate in the RFP. So the city doesn't feel that there's any entitlement for that being compensation from the city as well. So the next slide is on the city directed extra work at Bent 10L due to the settlement that occurred. The city rejected the pile because it was no longer stable if there was a settlement. At that time, Condon Johnson proposed to backfill the pile with slurry as a mitigation measure, and that was accepted by the city. And then after the city performed tests, it was determined that the soil outside the pile was no longer the same, in the same state as it was when the calculations were done to know how the pile would perform, because it uses the friction from the side of the pile as part of the load bearing. So they were directed to lengthen the pile by 20 feet to obtain the same load capacity. And instead of that, they offered to mitigate the soil by injecting it with grout. The city accepted that mitigation measure in lieu of lengthening the pile. So ultimately, there was no extra work performed by the contractor as directed by the city. Everything that was performed was to mitigate the issues that they encountered while they were drilling. The next item of extra work directed by the city that they claim was changes to the pile installation plan, and they indicated that they were now required to maintain 10 feet of fluid head. However, this was already a requirement in the contract anytime you're digging below the groundwater table. So the city did not add this requirement. We merely enforced it in a way that we could make sure while they were drilling that they were maintaining this 10 feet of head so that we wouldn't have any more problems like they had on Bent 10L. Requirement to maintain the soil plug, again, this was not something that the city added to the contract. Merely we were ensuring that they were only digging within the casing. The contract requires that excavation must be fully cased. So if you're digging below it, your excavation is no longer fully cased. Our only requirement was that we enforced that contract requirement that they can only dig within the casing. So again, based on this, no additional work was directed or performed. The last item for directed work is that they were now required to maintain continuous rotation of the casing. This was not a city-directed requirement either way. It's a means and methods by the contractor. They select how they want to drill the hole, what size equipment they're using. What they indicated is that because it was getting stuck, they had to maintain continuous rotation. However, prior to any casing ever getting stuck, they sent us a letter when Bent 10L settled that said, quote, maintaining rotation is paramount as the casing is currently penetrating approximately 102 feet below working grade. So it's clear to us that they had already known that it was required for their means and methods to maintain constant rotation of the casing. So adding that as a new requirement isn't valid, and it wouldn't have been directed by the city in either case. It was something that they need to do to be able to perform their work. They didn't mention it in their presentation today, so I don't need to go into too much detail, but they had included in their claim that they were required to mitigate concrete as part of the pile after they poured the concrete in, that there were some areas where it wasn't solid concrete, and they indicated that the city directed them to mitigate this, and that was extra work, but mitigating concrete that's not solid is a contractual requirement, so that isn't considered to be extra work. So the last slide I have is just comments that I wanted to bring to the board's attention. I already mentioned the first one, which is that the city's contract is with SSW and not Condon Johnson, so there may be disputes between the two that we as the city wouldn't be involved in. Also note that we didn't direct them to use this method with the casing. We only required that they use a Caltrans wet method. So if you're drilling below with the water table, you can either put slurry, polymer slurry inside the hole to hold it open, or a casing, and the casing method was the one that was proposed, and the prime contractor recommended that the city use this method because it's lower risk, and we actually paid a premium to use this method. The city has also noted many inaccurate facts and unsupported conclusions in the claim, and we've documented several contractor clause issues that we can cover in the rebuttal if necessary, but that they had equipment breakdowns and various other things that stopped the rotation of the casing, and that's when seizing of the casing occurred. And lastly, the city, as a result of all of the challenges that the contractor had, have expended significant funds to our designer to redesign the pile length, to our geotechnical engineer to do additional borings, reviewing mitigation reports, and these costs have and payments, probably the biggest portion is paying payments to the railroads for all the additional flagging time that they used to cross the railroads during the change in work plan that they had. And these costs at this point have exceeded $500,000. And in all of our documentation with the contractor, we continue to reserve our rights to recover these costs that we consider to be due to their work. So that is all I have for the main presentation. As I mentioned, we do have a lot of details we can go into on some of the contractor cause issues in our rebuttal if requested.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Allen. Any questions for her before we go back to the subcontractor? Mr. Burrow or Mr. Bonita, any response, or as well as Mr. Smith, any response at all in rebuttal to the city's responses to your claim? Okay.
Is it possible?
Mr. Davis.
Point of clarification.
Sure.
There have been testimony for both the subcontractor and then the Bureau of Engineering, and yet in both testimonies we've heard about the geotechnical person, but we've not had the geotechnical person present. Is it possible that he or she can come, or should we just reference them as we?
Would you have questions for the geotechnical?
Most definitely.
Okay. Then let's hear their rebuttal, and then we'll have your questions for the geotechnical. Okay?
So I'd like to start by kind of setting a general tone. As you can see, there's been nothing that's ever been acknowledged by the city as being their fault. Nothing. When initial notification went in on Bent 10L, stating that we thought there was a differing site condition that caused settlement in the loose fill, the material identified as loose fill, entitlement was immediately denied. We didn't follow up with costs because we were in a claim situation immediately. Every notification we provided and every notification we listed on a letter that was submitted 2 weeks ago was immediately denied. Many times before the engineer ever investigated the condition. Every single notification was denied. There are a lot of things that are being presented that are really out of context or out of order. For instance, the boulders encountered, it was stated that a geotechnical investigation cannot identify the extent of boulders to be encountered. That is not true. A geotechnical investigation done with hollow stem augers can. But you could easily mobilize a bucket rig and you could drill a larger diameter boring, and you could actually assess the quantity of boulders to be encountered. You could also follow your own specification and put a boring down the center of every pile. That's your specification, and that was not followed. The borings, the boulders that were primarily encountered that got the casing stuck at Bent 8, there's a boring very close, a hollow stem boring very close to that shaft that shows no boulders were encountered. The city has acknowledged in correspondence in the denial of the claim and in the report dated today, the board report, that the lower Fernando has the ability to expand. They've also acknowledged that we should have known that by virtue of that lower Fernando having clay. Clay does not always expand. And when it does expand, it expands to varying degrees. If the city or the city's geotechnical engineer thought that that was an issue, there's two things. One, that expansion potential should have been tested. It was not. Those test results should have been presented, but if they didn't test it, they didn't have anything to present. The second thing, the lower Fernando, although it has water, it's essentially an impermeable layer. So the water that's really introduced into it is introduced into it by drilling. What happened on 10L as it was presented, there's a number of things. Number one, it was just stated that the contractor had a choice on the means and methods to construct the shafts by the presenter. The presenter that made that statement wrote a letter to SSW stating that the city chose the rotator method. That's the presenter's letter. The city chose the rotator method to construct these shafts. That means putting the casing into the lower Fernando, and we should have known that that material was going to swell. That shows their misunderstanding of that formation if they really felt it was going to swell. As far as notifications, there was continuous and timely notification. Like I said earlier, every notice was immediately denied, many times with no investigation. As far as putting together costs, the lower Fernando differing site condition affected everything on the project from the time it was encountered. There was no way to forward price that effect on the job. And in the effort of submitting a certifiable claim, the level of effort to go into every single shift and pick out what was extra and what was contract work is what took all the time to get those claims generated and presented. The evidence of the differing site condition was presented in the Group Delta report, where we presented that the material has the ability to expand. That ability to expand is what locked up the casing at bent 11R and bent 4L. And it's what led us to change our means and methods and continue rotation. The city's reference to a letter that said that casing needed to be rotated is totally unrelated and out of context. And it's from a letter related to bent 10L, where we were directed to stop work when there was a surface subsidence. And we said, we need to continue rotation. We can't just leave this casing in the ground for an unknown amount of time. We're not saying 24 hours a day. We're saying we need to keep the casing moving. That has nothing to do with encountering the lower Fernando formation, which was actually 3 shafts later when we got stuck on 11 right. That statement is completely out of context. The other thing on 10L is the order that the city just presented their argument. There was surface subsidence at 10L. The city believed that that surface subsidence was because of a collapse where soil came into the bottom of the shaft. Con and Johnson does not believe that that happened. We told the city right then we should finish this shaft. We proposed to compaction grout in writing, in a letter. Let's finish the shaft, let's compaction grout it. if there's an issue. We were directed verbally, the city would not put it in writing, so we followed up with a letter explaining what the verbal direction was. The only way to backfill a shaft, yeah, we proposed the slurry to backfill that shaft because there's no other way to do it. In the meeting that we had with the city, when we were told to abandon the shaft, we said we'll backfill the shaft with slurry to get our casing out to continue work. We did not want to abandon that shaft. We wanted to build the shaft to its original tip elevation. The shaft was then lengthened. Now, we've got our consultant here to explain the argument that the city used to lengthen that shaft. It has no engineering merit whatsoever. The soil description and the parameters for that description were changed in an effort to show that the shaft needed to be lengthened, which was only self-serving to support the direction to abandon the shaft in the first place. Abandoning that shaft was completely unnecessary. And I know we're not here to talk about money, but that was $500,000. That decision to abandon that shaft was $500,000, as opposed to $30,000 to compaction grout, which was proposed to the city before we ever abandoned the shaft, at no cost. Hope I'm not repeating myself. As far as the risk register goes, SSW is going to have to respond to that. But the correspondence that we've seen between the city and SSW is that the risk register does not cover a differing site condition. What we're talking about here is a differing site condition. We're not talking about the risk of encountering potentially a boulder, or encountering water, or encountering the bedrock. We all knew that that was what was going to happen. Encountering bedrock that swells with a directed method of installing shaft with casing, I can't imagine that an $11,000 risk register item would cover what the city has shown is a $6 million claim. Regarding the anomalies that the city talked about, the test method used to test the piles is gamma-gamma. The test method,
What?
it's gamma-gamma.
Okay.
So it's a nuclear probe that goes down, sends a signal, and it comes back, and it tests the relative density of the concrete over depth. There's always a discussion on if there's an anomaly noted, is that a defect in the pile? The test method also states that you're supposed to have so many points beyond 3 standard deviations to actually qualify as a defect. Every anomaly was required to be mitigated. Every anomaly was identified as a defect. That's not how you evaluate the test method. That led to additional cost and time to mitigate piles. That's what we're claiming. We're not claiming that if there was a true defect by the test method that we had to mitigate, that it wasn't our responsibility. There's a standard that has to be followed. I think that's pretty much it. Unless, Cruz, do you want to comment on the Lower Fernando at all?
If you're going to speak, please come to the microphone since we make an oral record. And just let us know who you are, sir, and who you're with.
Regarding the Lower Fernando
Sir,
Formation.
could you get your name and company so we have a record?
Sure. My name is Pirus Kashigandi. I'm with Group Delta Consultants,
Okay.
geotechnical consultant. So regarding the Lower Fernando Formation, the Lower Fernando Formation is essentially a 500,000-year-old bedrock. It doesn't contain, it contains water, it could be saturated, but it's a non-water bearing formational material. that means that it doesn't have free water. When free water is introduced by maintaining a head, that results in the material to expand. Now, the level of expansion of clay material is evaluated by an expansion index test. So expansion index test essentially provides an evaluation on the degree of expansion, which goes from very low to very high. The material that was tested by us from Ben 12 came out to be medium expansion. So the degree to which this material expands was not evaluated. It could have been on the low side. It could have been even higher than what the test results came out. But there was essentially no information presented in the documents that I have reviewed, the contract documents or the source report, that advises the contractor that this material is going to swell when exposed to free water. So, would you like me to comment?
Okay, Mr. Bonita, yes. Yes, give us one moment.
Sorry.
One moment. We'll get your presentation back online.
Page 3. So what you'll see in our
Okay, so page 3, sir.
Excuse me.
Okay, got
What you'll see in our presentation is actual language from the city documents, the geotechnical reports and all that stuff. The contrast between what the presenter has presented is just language with no reference to the specifications. So what's important with that is the city says basically that we should have known that the clay would expand. Of that extraction from the geotechnical, from the baseline report says consider either a hard stiff clay, silt, clay stone, or silt stone rock.
I'm just going to read it into the record again. The second sentence says, well, I'm going to read the first and second sentences. The Lower Fernando, also known as the Repetto member, is a dark gray micaceous silty clay and clayey silt. This material can be considered either a hard, stiff clay soil or a soft clay stone or silt stone rock. Go ahead.
Thank you. And what the presenter also said is that there's the potential to swell. So in bidding the project, going through the documentation, there's no reasonable expectation that it would swell. The other thing, a couple of things, because George did a real good job covering things. The basis for the 20-foot extension in the bent 10 left pile was based on new supplemental borings that the city performed. And this was found through a public records request where the city actually, the consultants for the city were clarifying to the city that the basis was that. And it's actually in emails, in an email exchange back and forth. Part of that exchange was reference to a request we had for the calculations to add 20 feet to the pile, and that there was no baseline. So no other supplemental boring at any other piles occurred on the project. The consultants told the city that they didn't even recommend it in response to our question. Just to really briefly highlight the notification, the city says that the 24-hour notification is so that they can properly investigate. They documented all the excavations of the shafts. They were there in real time. They were presented with boulders. They were presented with stiff materials that were impacting the casing advancement. The intent of the notification, so the city or its consultants could actually investigate, was complied with. One of the things that's most surprising in obtaining the information was that the boulders that were presented to the city's representative on site were not logged into their field log of the excavation in some locations. I think it's important to not gloss over a boulder being 16, 18 inches or 2 or 3 feet. The boulders impacted the ability to advance the casing. So it could be a couple, it could be numerous, but they were encountered throughout the project to some degree. The presenter also said that it's the contractor's method, including size, to construct the pile. We submitted an RFI after we felt that the lower Fernando was swelling to seat the casing into the top of the lower Fernando and drill the remainder of that open hole. Because the specifications require temporary casing to prevent quick conditions. It was obvious that the lower Fernando did not need temporary casing. The city rejected the RFI and said, it's your responsibility to come up with another cage design and a smaller diameter. It's not ours. They also note in their presentation that access to the railroads is for the contractor to establish. The access to the railroads is for the city to establish. The coordination to access the railroad property is for the contractor to coordinate. In the process of communicating and submitting and trying to coordinate with the railroad, there were numerous submittal revisions and requirements prior to even going to the railroad. So there was interference with the actual ability to communicate with the railroad on that. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Who are you?
Jeff Smith.
Okay.
Jeff Smith.
From Skanska?
Yes, I'm
okay.
with Skanska. So
Sorry, I had somebody else pegged as Jeff Smith. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. They've used my name a lot on the years.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a common name. But I've got your card.
Okay, thank you very much. The city has mentioned on a number of occasions that we may have a dispute between the general contractor, Skanska, and our subcontractor. So I just wanted to alleviate that concern. I have the subcontract right here, and I just wanted to read the flow-through provisions in our subcontract. So again, in our mind, this claim is a pure pass-through claim. In our provision number 5, subcontractor obligations, subcontractor assumes to the contractor all of the obligations and responsibilities applicable to the performance of this subcontract which the contractor assumes towards the owner, respecting performance of the prime contract. Subcontractor is bound to the contractor in the same manner and to the same extent that the contractor is bound to the owner under the prime contract. Where the prime contract or other contract documents refer to the contractor and the work therein pertains to, the subcontractor work as such work shall pertain and apply to the subcontractor rather than the contractor. In this particular case, the risk register, this is a difficult drilling conditions versus differing site conditions. The city sold to the contractor the difficult drilling conditions. The contractor sold to our subcontractor these very same difficult drilling conditions. As far as the railroad coordination, same things. Railroad coordination versus access or lack thereof. We coordinated with the railroad. Condon Johnson coordinated with the railroad. The very same. So it's an access issue. Again, this claim is a pure pass-through. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Allen, you've got a choice. We can hear from your geotech, and then we can go through rebuttal, which, or if you would prefer, we can have rebuttal and put them together. But
I'd like to hear from a matter, if it's permissible, I'd like to hear from the geo person if that makes any sense.
We plan to have Pat Wilson, who's our geotech, provide the rebuttal, and then any
Great.
questions that you have, he'll be up here already.
Okay, there you go. We just solved two things with one. Commissioner Davis and you are both satisfied. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Pat Wilson. I work for Earth Mechanics. We're a geotechnical consultant, so we're a sub to the design team for the bridge, which is H&TB. I've been working on this project since we were awarded our contract in 2013, including during our field investigation, during the design, and also up through construction. So I've been working under some of our more senior leadership on the project. The reason why I'm here instead of them, and I'm nervous in front of you today,
No need to be, sir.
is
Go ahead.
because I was out there feeling the soil during our drilling before the design. I worked on the design, and I was out there during construction observing the contractors, coming up with a way to log the activities that are going on, taking pictures, talking to them, trying to keep a record so that the city can have sort of their own version of events, and so that we can make sure that we end up with a good foundation for this iconic bridge. It's very hard to tell what's going on underground if you don't have good notes. So I've been there the whole time, and that's why I'm here today. So I want to talk about the Lower Fernando Formation claim as a differing site condition first.
1 second, let us get the right presentation on the screen.
I think I can do it like this. Can you guys see
Yes,
my
we've got it.
cartoon graphics here? We'll come back to that. Oh, I'm going to jump around. I'm going to do it out of order. So don't worry about reading this whole thing here. Let me just get to the page so I can see it here. So Julie touched on some of this, but regarding whether or not this Lower Fernando is a differing site condition and whether or not it causes the casing to get stuck, I just have 6 points here. First of all, we classified the Lower Fernando Formation as a hard silt and clay to weak siltstone and claystone. I think everyone has agreed. That's exactly what it is. So it is what we said it was. We showed it on our boring logs at the correct elevations. It was encountered where it is. So we said where it was correctly, and we classified the soil correctly. Therefore, it's not a differing site condition. They're bringing up, I would say, a complaint that we didn't perform expansion testing on that material. So the reason we didn't perform expansion testing on that material is because it's not relevant to the design of our deep foundations. I got a couple of excerpts from textbooks here about, these are undergraduate textbooks that are common.
1 moment, sir. Just take a quick recess. I've got a copy of that, but my colleagues don't. So
No
Dr.
problem.
Campos is going to make us a quick copy of those. Dr. Campos, are we ready to go?
Yes, we are.
Okay, we'll reassemble now, everybody. Oh, okay. Well, we'll wait like 60-second warning. Tell everybody we're going to start in just a minute.
So, I'm not, it's okay, Gary already knows this. Instead of skipping to that slide, I'm going to start on number 19 to make it easier for everyone to page through in sequential order. So, slide 19 is where we'll start.
Oh, ours aren't numbered that way.
Oh.
Oh, got it. Okay. Thank you. No, we don't need the clock. We're good. Hey, Ted.
Why? Because you don't put your, because you put your contacts in, or just put the contacts in? You need a new prescription. Somebody said once we start wearing these glasses. I'm trying not to get a new prescription because once you start getting them, it gets thicker and thicker and thicker. Next thing you know, I got the same one. It expires in September. I'm getting my glasses before September because I don't want a new prescription.
Okay, are we all ready now? Thank you, sir. Please proceed. We have your the presentation in more hands than just mine.
Thank you. So as Julie described a little bit, just to give us a visual of this method that's being used to construct these piles, there's a photograph here of the contractor's equipment, which consists of the steel casing, 10-foot diameter steel casing, a piece of equipment called a rotator, which spins it into the ground, and a grabber, a mechanical bucket grab that goes inside and grabs the soil and pulls it out. Typically, if you want to construct these piles at a site where you're going to go below the groundwater, you use one of two methods. Either the casing like what they used, or you just drill an open hole with no casing. If you drill an open hole, you're required to use a special slurry past groundwater, like a polymer slurry. It's designed specially to help prevent that hole from caving in, among other things. If you have a casing, the hole's not going to cave in because the casing's there to prevent sand and gravel or whatever the soil is from spilling in. In which case, since they're using a casing, they're allowed to use water instead of the special slurry. Now, the problem is, as Julie mentioned, if you dig past the casing, which our notes show the contractor was doing, you now have a portion of the hole which is unsupported by the casing, and it has water in it instead of the slurry that you would need for an uncased hole. And the soils in the upper 80 to 100 feet are a mixture of sand and rocks, sand and gravel and cobbles. This type of soil can fall into the hole. Okay? Oops, wrong way. So it can fall into the hole like that. And if it falls into the hole, it leaves a void where it used to be, outside of the diameter of the hole. And as you keep going down, then you extend your casing down, keep adding more casing and keep going down, you're leaving a void in the soil. It doesn't necessarily collapse right away. Sometimes it can just stay intact. If you're doing this all the way down, you might have multiple voids all the way down in your hole. And eventually, the soil is going to cave into those voids and drop at the surface. And that's exactly what happened at the site. I have pictures of the caving at the surface, which we'll get to. But there's another issue. So, sorry, I haven't updated you on what slide number I'm on. Okay. There's another issue that helps stabilize these holes when you're drilling, which is the fluid you have to put inside the casing or in the hole. So there's water in the ground at some level, say roughly 50 feet deep. If you're digging a hole, you're scooping out soil and water. If you didn't replenish that water, the water level in the hole would be lower than the water level in the ground. So water wants to flow in and balance it out, and it can carry soil with it. So they're required to put more water in the hole than outside to prevent that from happening. If you don't have the water, well, the slide illustrates that if you didn't have the water, it could be flowing in and carrying soil particles with it, adding additional caving in the hole. So based on our field notes on 10L, there were instances when they dug past the tip of the casing, like the slide illustrated. The very first time we had the opportunity to see if the water was in the hole, I say the first time we had the opportunity because we as acting as inspectors, we can't just measure it whenever we want. It's dangerous equipment. We have to stand back. We can only measure it when they allow us to measure it. The very first time we were allowed to measure it, the water wasn't in the hole. So they're digging past the tip of the casing. They don't have the water. We also observed some things that looked off, like there was a segment of the hole where more soil was coming out than we would expect. And also, there's different layers of soil where you have brown soil and then gray soil. And that came out in the wrong order. We had brown soil coming out, then gray, and it should have remained gray, but we got some more brown soil, which both of those are signs that soil was caving into the hole. Sorry, I'm going back to where I just was. So I was actually there. I'm the one that did the field log. I was there, and on the fourth day of excavating this pile, which is the very first pile constructed for the bridge, I'm standing there doing my thing. I climbed up on every dump truck full of soil, took a picture of the soil, logged what type of soil it was. The guy in charge for the contractor, his name was Mark, he came up to me and he said, "We got a problem." He told me that the ground and the equipment all sunk about 2 feet. And he said, "We got ahead of ourselves." That's what he said to me. To me, that means they dug past the tip of the casing. So at this point, this is what it looked like. I walked over to the equipment with Mark, and it looked like this. So if you start with a picture on the right, that's the rotator with its tracks under it. And you can see there's a hole under it. That should be sitting on the ground, but the ground dropped out from under it. And then the picture on the upper left shows where the ground had dropped as well. And then the picture on the bottom left, they have a way that they can lift the rotator up. It climbs up the casing, and you can see where the ground settled even more. So all of those points that I had on the previous slide point to this is what happened. They dug past the tip of the casing. They didn't have the water in there. Eventually, all the voids collapsed. The soil came down. Boom. Now we have 2 feet or 16 inches, whatever they want to call it, of settlement at the surface. At that point, we're in a position where we have to be able to determine whether this pile is going to be able to do its job or not. Okay? So in order to do that, the city hired us to go out and drill holes around the pile. That's what they were referencing. We went out. They pulled their equipment out, slurried up the hole, and we went out and drilled 4 holes around the pile, and then 1 hole 15 feet away from the pile. And we made a comparison. How does it look? The one 15 feet away, we assume, is what the ground was like before this happened, and the 4 right next to the pile is what we have now. And it showed that the stuff right around the pile was much less dense than the stuff 15 feet away, and it also showed that the stuff right around the pile, to a depth of about 50 to 70, I think 70 feet was the depth at the bottom of the caving, was worse than what we had assumed for design. Basically, in design, we assumed that that sandy soil fit into one of two categories. Either it was excellent soil, like some of the best you can get, because that's when you have gravel and boulders and rocks and stuff like that, it can be very good stuff. So we either had excellent stuff or decent stuff. We didn't have any terrible stuff. It's not a bad soil site out there. Well, what we did was we assumed that all the stuff that dropped down to fill those voids, and that our borings indicated was less dense than the excellent stuff, we downgraded it from excellent to decent. We didn't ignore the capacity of it. We just used a different method for the decent soil than the excellent soil. And that told us the pile needed to be 20 feet longer in order to do its job. So we wanted the contractor to make it 20 feet longer so we would feel good about this pile to hold up this iconic bridge. They didn't want to do it. That's been covered. They preferred to do the compaction grouting that they did. We were trying to be as cooperative as possible, so we allowed them to do that. And they did that, which means they pumped grout under extremely high pressure in the ground, and it basically pushed the soil back up against the pile. So it squeezes the pile tighter and gives us back the capacity we need so the pile can do its job. So, so from what we see, the contractor caused their own problems there and had to fix them so that they could build us the pile that the city was paying for. Regarding digging past the tip of the casing, this is something we saw at other piles as well. This is just one example. These pictures show the wooden planks are covering a pile that has been built, and these holes popped up next to it. And this is very similar to 10L, where if you're digging past the tip of the casing, soils can be caving in, and eventually it shows up at the ground surface. I have another example later. If there's time, I'll get to it where we observed the same thing. So now I'll move on to the issue about the Lower Fernando and whether it's swelling and causing problems. As I mentioned before the break, we described the material correctly and we said where it was. So they encountered what we said they would encounter. It is where it's supposed to be. The complaint is really that we didn't perform expansion testing. Well, expansion testing, I've got some examples from test books here. It's only a few sentences, don't worry, about swelling of soils. So for example, this is from the first geotechnical engineering textbook I ever saw in my undergraduate soil mechanics class. Swelling, like shrinkage, is generally confined to the upper portions of a soil deposit. Thus, swelling damages lighter structures such as small buildings, highway pavements, and canal linings. What this saying is, you're worried about swelling up at the surface. Like if you want to build a house and there's clay there and it's not saturated yet and it has the potential to swell, you build the house, you start watering your lawn, or it rains, it becomes saturated and expands, and then your house goes like this and the foundation cracks. Or if you want to use clay material as a fill behind a retaining wall, you put some clay behind a retaining wall or soil that has clay in it and it's expansive, it rains, it expands, it pushes the wall out and it bends or cracks. But it's not relevant to piles that are going 150 feet below grade. You don't do expansion testing for piles that are 150 feet below grade. At the locations where the casing got stuck, the Lower Fernando Formation is 80 to 100 feet below grade, and it's below the water table. It's already saturated. I'll just read from another textbook. These aren't obscure journal papers. I spend my free time reading journal papers, so these are from a textbook called Foundation Analysis and Design 1996 by Bowles. 2 of the 3 guys in my office had this book on their shelves yesterday when I pulled this out. Expansive soils undergo volume changes upon wetting and drying. For a volume change to occur, these soils must be initially unsaturated. The Lower Fernando Formation is below the groundwater table and it's saturated. That's why we didn't perform expansion testing for the project. the gentleman from Group Delta mentioned that they tested some soils for expansion index, and he says it's expansive. I have the first page of the ASTM, the standard for expansion index testing. It says a specimen is prepared by compacting a test soil into a metal ring at a degree of saturation of 50%. So you test a sample that's not saturated. That's not the same as the stuff that's underground that is saturated. So whatever they did in the lab is not likely to be representative of what's underground. So they haven't proven, first of all, they haven't proven that this stuff is expanding underground where it's below the groundwater table. And even if it did expand somehow, they haven't proven that that's the cause of the casing getting stuck. They built something like 21 piles with the casing and only got stuck twice. Once at 11R, which I'll talk about more, and once at Bent 4, where they had some other problems which caused delays. So if it's expanding, I don't know how they built the other 19 piles with no problems. So I observed some things in the field and heard some things in meetings that lead me to believe that they're causing their own problems with this stuff. There was a meeting when the casing was stuck with the city, the design team, and the contractor about what to do. And after the meeting, I went up to the contractor and I asked them, I said, when you guys are trying to decide what kind of means and methods you want to use to build a pile for a job, like say you're thinking about using the rotator, how do you determine if it has enough turning capacity to overcome the friction you expect? Do you compare the maximum torque that it can exert with some estimate of friction along the casing? And they said to me, no, it doesn't work like that. It cuts an oversized hole. So that got me thinking. It cuts an oversized hole because there are teeth on the very first casing, which are shown on this slide. The teeth stick out maybe like 1/4 to 1/2 inch beyond the edge of the casing. There's a mechanical pencil on one of the pictures that provides some scale. So it sounds like to me they're relying on that to cut an oversized hole so they don't have to worry about friction on the casing. The problem with that, the first problem with that is we're talking about soil, not like hard rock like granite. We have about 80 to 100 feet of sand and gravel and cobbles. And then we have the Lower Fernando Formation, which we already said was hard silt and clay to weak siltstone and claystone. This stuff is not like granite. You can take your thumbnail and put an indentation in it. Okay, it's orders of magnitude less stiff and strong than something like granite. So this sand and gravel and Lower Fernando, if you excavate 150 feet deep, it's going to relax. It's not going to remain perfectly straight like a really hard rock. It's going to relax. And if you don't have a big oversized hole, it's going to touch the casing and it's going to exert friction on it. Also, I started thinking, okay, this is like the 3rd or 4th pile that they've built on this project, and there are a lot of gravel and cobbles down there. That's hard stuff. So I wonder how those teeth look. They've been using it for a few piles now. I wonder what they look like. So I called up the RE, Karen, and the structures rep, Hu Shang, and I said, hey, can you guys just take some pictures of the cutting teeth when they finally get the casing out of the hole? So these are the good cutting teeth here in good condition. You can see the little knobs on them that help them stick out. And then these are the teeth when they pulled the casing out from 11R. On the bottom left, there's a rock in the picture. You can ignore that. The teeth are the rectangular pieces that are at the bottom of the casing. And the face of the teeth were worn smooth. There were no bumps anymore. It was smooth. They looked severely worn. So if this thing's not cutting an oversized hole, that could be contributing to why the casing got stuck at this particular location. I don't know how I'm doing on time. Okay. So some of the claim was boulders, a differing site condition for boulders at Bent 8. But I saw some other problems at Bent 8 that caused significant delays that were unrelated to boulders, and I didn't hear them mention these problems. So in the upper 20 feet of the soil, there's an extra casing that they have to put in. It's called a CMP, a corrugated metal pipe. It's a cylinder that has a bigger diameter than the pile. So they were just using an excavator to dig up a hole for that and dropping it in, and which is their choice. If that's how they want to do it, that's fine. But at Bent 8, when they did that, the soils caved in. They couldn't keep the hole open. It caved in. So in order to fix that and put the CMP in, they backfilled their caved-in hole with slurry, and then they came back and drilled a ring of smaller diameter slurry piles around it, and then redid that 20-foot excavation in there so they could put it in, put the can in, we call it the can, in without the soil caving. And that set them back a week or two at least. So I think a lot of the delay on Bent 8 was not because of boulders, it was because of this. What I saw when they encountered a boulder is that gigantic grabber goes down, it picks up the boulder, and then it goes like this, and it drops it. I didn't see a significant delay from the boulder. Another thing that happened at Bent 8 that cost them some time, I was looking back at the field notes. There was an instance on February 8, 2017, where we were allowed to measure the bottom of the hole and the tip of the casing again, and the hole was 2.5 feet past the casing, which means it could be susceptible to caving. And they observed that the crane next to the hole started sinking on the ground surface. It started sinking on the ground surface, which could be similar to 10L, where if stuff is caving in and voids are collapsing, that can cause it to sink. Well, they had to fix that, so they had to move the crane, call SSW to come out and regrade the surface, put the crane back so they can keep going. So the biggest delays I saw on our field log on Bent 8 wasn't boulders, it was these two things. They also were part of their claim was that boulders caused significant delays on Bent 6. On Bent 6, they also had to install an upper casing, and they used a drill rig to do that with some bars that extend out and turn a casing. So the picture on the bottom left shows how this bar slots into the top of a cylindrical casing. Well, the bars that are sticking out, they call them extenders, they were the wrong size. There's a 4.5-inch square hole, and the bars were 4 inches. So when they would turn it, it just put a huge stress concentration right on that bar, and the bar snapped off. Both of them snapped off. And this caused a big delay. So I think some of the delay at Bent 6 was not from the boulders, but from their own problems like this. Am I supposed to cover anything else? Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Davis, we'll start with questions with you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you so much for your report. And I wanted to just ask a couple of questions. The issue with regard to the test of the clay, did we mention the clay in our report that you did?
We mentioned the clay, yes. We characterized the soil as very hard clay and silt to weak siltstone and claystone. And on all of our, in the plans for the bridge, the actual plans, there's something called a log of test boring sheet. We call it LOTBs. And it shows the borings, and it tells you the soil type, and where it's classified as clay, it says clay. Lean clay, fat clay, silt, yeah, all over the place there's clay on those LOTBs.
And you mentioned to us in your testimony that the clay doesn't always expand. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, not all clay expands, and the information that I read to you was that a condition for it to expand is that it has to be unsaturated.
Okay. And in terms of the report that we gave, did we state and give them the analysis, our analysis as it related to that? In fact, that there was no need to go further in this circumstance in our report and how we observed it. Was that a part of our report as well?
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
when we did an assessment of the clay, how, I didn't see the report itself, unfortunately. How far did we elaborate with regard to some of the testimony that you gave today in the report? Were we descriptive?
We were descriptive of the soil type. We were not discussing expansion of the clay.
Okay, so it's not customary to give an analysis or to paraphrase at that point in our report?
It's not customary to do that for a deep foundation, for piles that are extending 150 feet below grade. It is customary to do that if you have clay near the surface that's not saturated and you're going to build some lighter structure on top of it, like a house, or if you're using it behind a retaining wall. So in some instances, it's appropriate to do it. In this instance, it's not relevant to our design.
I guess what I'm asking is, in terms of analysis, did we say clearly that in terms of our assessment of clay, there is no need to go further with any further examination because of A, B, and C?
We never said there's...
Did we put that in our report?
We never said there's no need to go any further. No.
Was there a need to go any further?
No, not for our design. Our report is to support the foundation design.
Correct.
And we also characterize the soil as much as possible that the contractor can look at it. But when the contractor when we write the report, we don't know what means and methods the contractor is going to use to construct the pile.
Sure.
So and we also aren't experts on the contractor's means and methods.
Sure.
So we wouldn't be able to speculate on exactly what lab tests they might be curious about. But we did, I think Julie mentioned, our company invited the contractor through the CMGC to come and observe our drilling in the field and also come to the lab and inspect our samples. And Condon Johnson is one of the firms that came. We actually have a sign-in sheet where they came to observe the samples. They had the opportunity to ask about additional lab testing. They never did.
So you assess that the circumstance involved in the clay was what again? What did you say in your testimony? I apologize for not being able to paraphrase it, but you did give us an analysis in terms of what happened and occurred. Of course, we know that the subcontractor is saying that we didn't test further the clay. There was no need for us to do that, and I hear you on that. But what was the issue in terms of why we had problems there, as you see it, as a geotech person?
That gets into opinion, to be perfectly honest with you. It's very difficult to prove 100% what is happening underground that we can't see. The problem that I saw was that the contractor told me that they didn't compare the capacity that their equipment has with some expected friction that might be exerted on the casing. In other words, they didn't check to see if they had the right equipment. And then also the cutting teeth were severely worn down, whereas they were relying on those teeth to cut an oversized hole to prevent friction from being on the casing. So, but I can't prove that. That's what I saw in the field.
In our report, in terms of boulders, that issue was mentioned. Was there an assessment of the various boulders on the site in the report that we were commissioned to do? In other words, you were commissioned to do.
Yeah, I think as Julie kind of described, we mentioned the boulders, and we performed 5-inch and 8-inch diameter holes. I mean, we drilled 5 and 8-inch diameter holes to do our field investigation. And the sampling we do either has a 2.4-inch or 1.4-inch opening, and we drive this sampler into the ground. So it has no way of collecting a boulder. But what we did do is make note on our logs if we heard what we call rig chattering, which is usually a sign that the drill bit is sitting on a bigger particle, like a cobble or a boulder. So what we stated in our report was that there's gravel, there's cobbles, and there are possibly boulders. And we explained the issue with the sample size in our report, saying that we can't tell you exactly how many boulders there are because it won't fit in our sampler. Plus, we're drilling at discrete points. So say we did 30 borings along the entire bridge, and each boring is only 5 inches or 8 inches in diameter. You might do a boring and it doesn't hit a boulder at all, but there could be a boulder right here.
Sure.
So we said
So in our
possibly
report,
boulders.
no boulders were shown, but you stated that they could be present.
That's correct.
And I guess they had some problems with our analysis there, but you were very clear there. Now, when we look at one of the statements that was said in your report, according to information they presented, it says the formation is generally massive to very thickly bedded but occasionally thin beds of laminations were observed. The material is highly bioturbated, which has destroyed most of the bedding. The orientation of the bedding was generally at low angles ranging from 0 to 10 degrees. In that statement, does that allude to anything in terms of potential expansion of any?
That's a statement written by a geologist.
I see.
And my opinion is no, but a geologist would be better qualified to answer that. I'm a geotechnical engineer, so we basically kind of put numbers on everything, and the geologist discusses lamination and bioturbation and things like that.
Okay. So in summary, certainly having heard some of the concerns that the subcontractor has raised, what would you, in just a brief summary in your own words, say that is the circumstance that we have before us today as it relates to some of the issues that they have raised? How would you summarize it in your own words in terms of some of the issues that have been presented by the subcontractors?
I think a lot of the problems they have are because of digging past the tip of the casing and not taking it seriously that the water needs to be in the hole when you get to the water table. And I think that if true what they told me when they said we don't check to see if we have enough turning capacity to overcome the friction, then I think that is a significant problem. I think if you have a piece of equipment that can only turn so hard, it seems to me that you should at least try to estimate how hard do we need this thing to be able to turn before we decide to use it. So I would say those are the two biggest problems.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis. Commissioner Cabello, then Commissioner Coloza.
Thank you, President James. I actually have a question for Ms. Allen. Thank you, sir. It was a really informative presentation. And this may need further clarification. I think, Ms. Allen, you'll be fine, but I might need further clarification from either contract administration or the city attorney's office related specifically to the contract and, excuse me, the coordination versus access issue that the claimant, I guess is the best term, has brought up, and the railroads. Can you please clarify what the contract reads regarding access to the railroads versus coordination? Is that best for ConAd, or is that a city attorney issue, or?
I can read it.
Excellent.
Happy to. It's actually in my slide.
Is that page 12 of your slide?
I have a lot of paperwork here, I'm sorry. You have a hard copy? Okay, so the language in the contract is that the contractor shall work within the, oh, I'm sorry, slide 12. The contractor shall work within the constraints and restrictions as defined in each construction and maintenance or C&M agreement. So each railroad has its own construction and maintenance agreement. Each railroad has its own timetables, restrictions, means of communicating, different types of access that they provide. And those were all included in the contract for the contractor to incorporate. The contractor shall prepare and submit for approval all documents requested by the railroad agencies to ensure compliance with the C&M agreement, including but not limited to clearances, track protections, working hour restrictions, access, coordination, and repair of damages. The contractor is responsible for all coordination activities and will not be entitled to any claims related to the delay of work due to lack of coordination or timely submittals with any railroad agencies.
So what I'm trying to figure out is if we are using access and coordination, not interchangeably, but in terms of how we relate or how the project relates to the railroads. And specifically in our contract, and maybe there's another clause, although that is helpful, does it say that both access to the railroads shall be obtained by the contractor as well as coordination with those railroads for the project? Is that what this reads? And maybe the city attorney can clarify that for me. I just want to be 100% clear because I think their argument is we are responsible for coordinating but not for access, that the city is responsible for that access. And I think that's probably very easily cleared and very clearly stated in the contract. So I just want 100% clarification on that one. I don't know if that's Mr. Jordan, if that's you, Ms. Allen, if that's you, Mr. Smith, if that's you. Calling you out.
City attorney can go first, and I'd be happy to add.
Can I try something on this first?
You may.
Just the language, and I mentioned this from the background of knowing what the city went through in dealing with each of these various railroads over the years. Contractors shall prepare and submit for approval all documents requested by the railroad agencies to ensure compliance with the C&M agreement. So whatever those documents are to ensure compliance with the C&M agreement are the responsibility of the contractor.
Correct. And that entails, President James, access and coordination.
Yes.
It's got to.
Both are listed.
That's the whole purpose.
I just wanted that be
The entire purpose of
100% cleared, spelled out in as most simple language as possible so that we are on the record stating that is both access and coordination, the responsibility of the contractor and their sub as a result.
The whole purpose was access.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Anything else, Ted?
No, and the construction and maintenance agreements with the railroads were provided to the contractor, and as Julie just indicated, the contract language was that the contractor shall work within those constraints and restrictions, and that was information that they knew in advance.
And constraints and restrictions could be anything from rerouted trains due to an accident that was unforeseen by everybody, due to inclement weather, due to any other restrictions that railroads, who we've all had experience working with, not always the easiest to access or coordinate with, but we are subject to whatever those restraints are. That includes weather, et cetera.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cabello. Commissioner Colosa.
Thank you, President James. I will add to something that Commissioner Cabello brought up on the railroads, and I think something that wasn't stated for the record here, but, and I actually don't think Mr. Jeff Smith was on the project yet when we had this, but Julie, can you confirm for the record who actually, which agency actually set up the meetings with the railroads? Recently, the one that we had.
Yeah, the mayor's office has helped us due to the contractors' challenges with working with the railroads. The mayor's office got involved to help assist in coordinating efforts, and commissioners, you know, you attended those as well. It has been a challenge, no doubt, and the city continues to do everything we can to assist the contractor in obtaining the necessary access to build the project.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was stated clearly for the record and everyone here that, you know, the city has gone, in my opinion, you know, above and beyond in really making sure that the railroad coordination was there. I was personally at those meetings as well as the team from BOE to really make sure that we made sure that you had the connection and the support that you needed, even though ultimately and legally the responsibility is on SSW to actually maintain that relationship. And actually, maybe I can have Mr. Jeff Smith up here for a few questions.
Thank you.
Hi, Jeff. So just I think as some context, can you please just state how long you've been on this project and whether or not there are any staff changes with who SSW put on this project?
Yeah, I've been on the project now for 3 months on the project.
Okay. And can you explain why there was a change in project management from SSW and why you were put on this project?
Yes, I can. So I was brought to the project to help with the relationship between the contractor and the city. And so I came to the project for that purpose specifically. I was on the project for less than a week, and the project manager on the project quit the project.
So you've had a history in terms of staff changes and management for the specific project?
There has been, yes.
Okay. And will you say that there's been improvement with coordination from the railroads as a result of the mayor's office and the board helping you guys facilitate that relationship?
Yes, I would say that definitely helps.
Thank you for that. And how long have you been with SSW?
I've been with SSW for 3 months.
Oh, okay. So I thought you were there previously as well.
Oh, I'm with Skanska for a long time.
Yeah. That was my question. How long have you been with Skanska?
Started with Skanska in 1987.
Got it. So is this your first project with the city, with Skanska or SSW?
Yes, it is.
It is, okay. But you know that has Skanska had a history of working with the city, even though this is the first one with SSW specifically as a joint venture?
I'm not aware of a relationship with the city.
Okay. And maybe, I don't know if I should call on Gary here, if you know this question, but are you aware, Skanska has a long working relationship with the city in terms of working on other projects?
Gary Lee Moore with the Bureau of Engineering. I can't recall prior to this project Skanska working with the Bureau of Engineering.
Okay. Yeah, maybe it was a Metro project that I'm thinking of. Okay. But so, I think we heard from BOE that, this process and where we are right now has taken a lot of time to get to this point. And so just for the record again from your words, did SSW have the opportunity to weigh in with a contract if you had other concerns, whether it related to deferring site conditions or any other issues that you may have anticipated? Did you have the opportunity, and were you given the opportunity by the city to weigh in before you signed the contract?
So let me speak to that differing site conditions for a quick second. So you actually have a letter that was part of Condon Johnson's exhibit that talks about the risk register on the project. So the risk register is attached as requested, is how the letter reads. The city's interpretation, ID number Foundation 6, difficult driving, to cover differing site conditions. This interpretation is incorrect. SSW did not accept risk for difficult drilling conditions due to differing site conditions. So this should be evident looking at the monetary value assigned to this risk. That's our statement.
Okay. But were you given the opportunity to actually voice any conditions or issues that you had with the contract prior to signing that legal agreement with the city of LA?
We were negotiating with the city, yes.
Okay. And when you went to the job site with BOE, did you raise any concerns about the soil condition when you were out there?
We would have done that through our subcontractor.
So were you notified by your subcontractor of any differing soil conditions when they went out to see the site with BOE?
Yes, they gave notice. We passed that notice on.
At the time of the actual inspection of the soil?
They were working hand in hand, and they'll be able to speak to this specifically, but they were working hand in hand with inspection daily.
Yeah, because I think one of the slides from the consultant from BOE actually was, very helpful. They put here the notification dates on their last slide of the notifications that they received from Condon Johnson, the date of the incident, the actual date received, and from this slide and from this chart, it does say that in every single instance, BOE was notified beyond what was agreed to in the actual contract, which is 24 hours. And it says here, just for the record, that the average days that you provided notice was 11 days. So as the prime contractor, you have the main responsibility to manage your subcontractor. Is that correct?
Yes.
So during these times, since there is a laundry list here of items that Condon Johnson filed an incident report, did you ever reiterate to them that they were non-compliant with the contract in terms of notification?
No, we have not, but they were in compliance with the contract. They were constantly meeting, coordinating, attending meetings, doing all of their planning at all times.
And maybe I can just ask the city attorney to clarify. So according to your knowledge of the contract, Ted, and what the notification dates are here, would you say that the subcontractor, and actually in this case, the prime, are they in compliance with the notification procedures that they agreed to in the contract?
No, they're not. Being in the field, observing something occur, and receiving a notification that the contractor's position is that constitutes a differing site condition are two entirely different things. So I think the summary of notification dates and the slide 38 that you're referring to indicates that they were well beyond the notification period that's described in the contract. However, notwithstanding the fact that these were all untimely, the Bureau did look at the merits, and they were denied both based on their late submission as well as on the merits.
Thank you. And thank you, Jeff. That was all the questions I had for now. And I think it might be helpful if somebody from the Bureau of Contract Administration could actually come up here for a few seconds, whether that's Chris Smith.
Mr. Smith, welcome, sir.
Good afternoon. Is it afternoon? It is afternoon. Chris Smith, Contract Administration.
Great. I just think it would be helpful. There's a lot of different agencies from the city involved in this project. The board, Bureau of Engineering, City Attorney's Office, and also the Bureau of Contract Administration. So can you just briefly summarize what Contract Administration's role is as it relates to this project?
The Bureau of Contract Administration is providing the contract administration in the form of inspection on this project. We have a team of full-time inspectors here on the project. Whenever the contractor is working, our role is to make sure that the contractor is complying with the terms and conditions of the contract, and when they successfully complete the work, based on the records that our inspectors accumulate, we generate the monthly progress payments.
Great. Thank you for that summary. And so, you heard a lot of testimony today, Chris, from, the Condon Johnson, from SSW, and also from Bureau of Engineering. Did you find that the Bureau of Engineering did a fair assessment of this claim, and do you agree with their recommendation that there are no merits to this claim by Condon Johnson?
The contract administration doesn't normally get involved in those things. We act as support for the Bureau of Engineering because this is clearly a claim which would fall outside of the contract scope. The contract administration's job is to administer the contract unless and until something within the original contract is out of bounds. In this case, it's a claim, so it would be. So we were consulted in all of these matters. To render an opinion on that, I don't think it would be appropriate for the inspector to do that.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. But you work closely with Bureau of Engineering and also the contractor in this entire course of this project. And so today's hearing is a little bit, it's not common. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And why is it not common to have a hearing today?
Usually matters like this are resolved outside of having to come before the board to decide them.
But usually hearings like this are when we're dealing directly with the prime contractor, right?
Correct.
Not the subcontractor.
Not normally. Usually these issues come through the prime.
And so typically when there's issues that a subcontractor is experiencing, who should they be processing their claim with?
The claim would come through the prime contractor with whom we have the contractual relationship with.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
I don't have any additional questions right
Thank
now.
you, Commissioner Closa. Commissioner Garcia?
Thank you, President. Thank you, President James. I have a question regarding the boulders situation. I think it's under Bent 8, if I'm not mistaken. Under the contract, it says that the contract may encounter difficult drilling conditions due to the obstruction, soil and water conditions, and other drilling challenges. The risk item covers all associated costs and time impacts due to resolving difficult drilling operations, including but not limited to soil and water conditions and obstructions up to 2 feet in diameter. Can the prime or the sub tell me how many boulders did you actually find, and were there any bigger than 2 feet? Because according to some of the pictures I have here, they're not bigger than 2 feet. So can I get a thorough, or the project managers, somebody can tell me exactly how many actual boulders we found? Because there's a claim for this, and I just want to be specific. Okay, maybe the project manager for the sub? I'm like, someone should have this thorough information.
If I understand your question correctly, you want to know a quantity of boulders at one of the Bent 8 piles?
In total, can you give me an explanation of the boulders? Because you're making a claim over a boulder situation that you've encountered. So I just want to know how many, was it a big size of boulders you encountered, or was it a minimal? And then how long of a stretch did you find how many boulders?
Encountering the boulders, I can't give you a quantity off the top of my head. I'd have to go look at pictures, but it was significant enough that it seized the casing to the point that the oscillator, which is the most powerful piece of equipment to turn the casing, actually imparted enough torque to separate all the bolts from the top joint of the casing.
Do you have a ballpark of how many boulders you found? Less than 10, more than 10, 20, 100?
Well, I just want to be clear. A boulder is larger than 12 inches in diameter. So the
Right.
2 foot that you're referencing in the risk register is not something that I'm aware that the prime contractor has accepted, and it's not in our scope of work, the risk register.
Right. Julie, is that something that is part of our contract, right, to the primes? Right, okay. So it was in your contract, right?
No, excuse me. To clarify, the only correspondence that I know of or that we know of regarding a risk register is the correspondence from the prime to us that they have not or had not accepted the risk register.
Okay, so that brings me to my other next point. Shouldn't we be really dealing with the prime? I mean, I take it that under the prime's contract to you, there's some clause about peer, I forgot the term you used, something about peer. In other words, you're passing all the responsibilities to your sub, but we, the city, do not contract with the sub, we contract with the prime, right?
Correct.
Okay, so then technically you should have been dealing with all of this with the prime and the prime with us. Is that the way it should have gone, right? But your prime put a clause in your contract saying something, a peer pass-through, that's what it was.
Yeah, I believe that they're referencing a pass-through in their contract terms with us.
Right.
Because it's our specific scope of work. And what I'm trying to say is that the development of a risk register and the agreement on the pricing is maybe what they're referring to as what's not agreed to. We were not involved in the development of a risk register.
Okay, so maybe this is a question for the prime. You signed a contract that stated that that we wouldn't, part of it is up to 2 feet in diameter, right? The risk. It's part of the risk. It's part of your general contract with the city.
I am not sure if that's part of our contract, honestly.
Contract administration, Julie, somebody?
This is Julie Allen for the record. I can confirm that that risk register was part of the contract. It's included as part of their task order GMP proposal, and it's part of the contract.
Okay, thank you. So it is part of your contract. So can I get a ballpark? I mean, you're claiming that there was boulders down there that were bigger, and there was quite a few. So how many ballpark boulders did you guys encounter? Yeah, we don't need to know exact numbers now, but just give me a ballpark.
So it's not a simple answer because in the excavation method, like
But I'm asking for anything above 2 feet in diameter.
the 2-foot qualification is not a classification for a boulder. It's separate and specifically itemized in the risk register. In terms of what is classified as a boulder is 12 inches, beyond 12 inches.
I don't think that's how it reads on the actual contract that your contractor signed with us.
Well, I believe, if you read the language of the risk register, I don't believe that it's other items as well, which because of
Right, and there was a cost contingency associated with that, right?
Yes,
so then there was some room for risk there that was attached with some money too, right?
I can't answer that.
Okay, so see, this is where your contract to the sub is a little confusing to us because we're working with you, but yet our contract is with the prime. So you really need to work with your prime to figure out what they agreed with us.
Yeah, and
right?
that's what I'm saying is that they agreed in the development of the risk register, but I don't think that
But they
based on
signed the contract.
Let's, I need to rein in the hearing a little bit so we have names. That was Mr. Bonita. That was Mr. Bonita. Mr. Burrows, go ahead. I just want to make sure that I'm trying to keep our recorded record that may be used in the future followable. Go ahead, sir.
This is George Burrow with Town and Johnson. As has been communicated to us by SSW, the prime, the risk register was to identify the risks that were identified in the contract documents, which was the potential to encounter a boulder up to 2 feet. The differing site condition is the abundance of boulders encountered. Boulder, per the geotech's presentation, is anything above 10 inches. The difference is what is a differing site condition and what is a contract condition that was to be anticipated by the risk register. SSW has maintained to us that the risk register does not include a differing site condition. Now, whether that clarifies your question, I don't know.
It kind of doesn't, to be honest with you. I still do. Well, we have a claim here for bent 4, 7 through 8, and we don't have it itemized, so maybe when we get into itemized, but it's a pretty large claim, claiming about boulders. So I just want specifics to know if it was a big impact, or was it small? It's a long stretch. How many did you encounter for you to make a claim against it?
In our presentation, there are photos of stacks of material that is in excess of 10 inches.
I see it, and I see when 14-inch was one of them, or 1.5 foot, which would be less than 2 feet, so that one shouldn't really be part of your claim.
That's not true. So
it's right here.
I understand. The dimension is correct. What's part of the claim is the abundance of boulders.
So you're claiming how many, right? How many boulders you actually encountered? Well, how many did you encounter?
I'd have to count from what's in the photos.
So based on here, I see 1, 2, about 4, 5, 7, 6, 7.
That's in one photo. We could go through multiple photos and count them up.
Well, yeah, if we're gonna, if that's a claim, we should get correct numbers on this. Okay. Because as far as I see, it's 6 in a stretch of how long is the stretch? How big is this, or?
What's the stretch?
The stretch that you did this. How long? How many in your entire work that you've done of all the bends? How many actual boulders did you encounter? Was it just these 6 that you showed us?
No, it's not just 6.
Then how many? Is it like 20?
It's in excess of that. We can count them based on all
Ballpark?
the photo. Hundreds.
Each bent, average?
It wasn't actually, the abundance of boulders wasn't throughout the site.
Okay,
It was
I
in
understand you
individual-
don't have the accurate number, but what I see here is 6. In one bent, in 2, in 3. I'm just trying to really get a number here, a feel for this.
It was in the presentation earlier that the boulders affected.
It wasn't then. Okay. Okay.
Boulders affected bent 8 and bent 6.
I got that, bent 8 and bent 6, yes. But in 2 bents, you've only really encountered 6 boulders?
No,
You encounter more.
well in excess.
Did you encounter more than 2 feet long?
I'd have to look at pictures and measurements. But a boulder is defined as anything in excess of 10 inches. So the difference is,
Well, according to our contract through the prime, it's up to 2 feet in diameter. So that's something that you might have to take it on with your prime.
I understand, but what I'm trying to clarify is there's 2 different things. There's what's in the contract, and there's what's in excess of the contract. So the contract identifies the possibility of encountering a boulder.
Chris?
That was never quantified by the geotechnical engineer because they didn't do any other investigation methods. They stopped with an 8-inch hollow stem auger. They could have done other investigation methods. So,
Point of clarification.
Yeah.
Well, hold on, Commissioner Davis. Let's let him answer and let her finish. Go ahead.
So to me, it's pretty clear that we have a contract that we signed with the prime, that it's part of your contingency if anything like this happens, and there's money associated with that. That was with the prime. Whether it was passed down to you, I'm not sure. That's something between you and the prime that you have to negotiate that. Now, I'm just trying to get a feel because there's a pretty large claim here about the boulders, and we have stated that anything above 2 feet would be something that we would need to look at. So far, I haven't seen anything above 2 feet that's a boulder or an obstruction or an impact. And if it's abundance, then how much is the abundance? And so maybe that's something else we can answer at a later point, if that's what we need to do.
I would say the quantity would have to be answered at a later point. The concept of the size of the boulder, as defined in the contract, is in excess of 10 inches. The quantity of the boulders that are anticipated are described as there's a potential. That potential was never further evaluated by the geotechnical engineer. The potential to encounter a boulder is what we understand SSW accepted. The potential to encounter an abundance of boulders is not what SSW accepted for $10,000 or $11,000. That's the difference.
I'm sorry, $11,000, that's how much you contracted for this type of work? What was the $11,000 for?
That's the value assigned to the risk register for
Okay,
that
we
line
don't have
item.
an itemized account, that's why. So I don't know what the 11,000 were for.
That's
But
the
is that
value.
part of your claim of the 4.4?
Is what part?
That those 11,000 are under your 4.4 claim?
I don't understand.
This is what I have. I have here that it's a 4, under band 4 through, and then 7 through 12, it's about 4.4 claim, $4.4 million claim. So 11,000 are under those 4.4. Is that separate? Okay. Got it.
I
Okay.
think we're on a different.
Yeah, okay. Well, I just really wanted to know how much, the quantity, if that's what we're talking about, but obviously we don't have the answer, and nobody seems to have the answer. So I'll get that answer after, and I'll ask more questions in a bit. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask one question, Kevin?
No,
Mr. President?
we don't really entertain questions. If you have a question, you have a question about process?
Process,
Yes.
So there was a second presentation that we would actually like to comment on that the city made. Their rebuttal was actually a second presentation. Will we have the opportunity?
Sure. Yeah. We're going to have to, at some point, though, start putting, we relaxed our time limits. We've got to get this wrapped up in 1 hour. We're going to be done by 2 o'clock today, so I'm going to start putting time limits on everything. So I know everybody, I haven't asked a single question yet, okay? Not one. So I've let everybody else ask questions. I'm going to give you time to respond, but then we've got Sir rebuttal and then Sir, at some point we got to finish. So we're going to allow you to respond in 10 minutes to that. And then I'm going to want to hear, I've got a couple of questions for engineering regarding the boulder discussion that we just had. And Commissioner Davis, you wanted to raise another issue as well. So Commissioner Davis.
There was an unresolved discussion about, I think Mr. Burrows alluded to a decision that we recommended that they do in terms of construction that ended in $500,000. I don't know what that was about. Julie, I was going to ask if you could address that issue that he had raised in his presentation. He suggested that we ask them to do something in construction that alternatively was $500,000 as opposed to a lesser fee.
Sure. Again, this is Julie Allen for the record, Bureau of Engineering. What he was talking about was at Bent 10L. This was the first foundation they were drilling, and it was the one that after they were about 100 feet deep, it settled. It dropped a couple of feet, and when the city could not accept that pile because it now settled, we weren't sure about the capacity now for the future foundation for the viaduct. We were talking about how to move forward, and initially at the field meetings, the contractor recommended backfilling it with slurry, and that would basically stabilize the hole that was there, and then they could go back and re-drill it when the time was to, when we've assessed the soil conditions around it, and we could move forward. So the city agreed that that was a good approach, backfilling it with slurry, but right before they re-drilled it, they changed their mind and in writing said that they think that they should just be able to re-drill the hole. They don't think that they need to lengthen the pile, and they proposed an alternative to mitigate the soil with a grout injection to restore the side friction. So ultimately the city did accept that, but that was later. It was, at the time we needed to get the hole filled up so that it was stable because it was in, the casing was down in the hole and we didn't know what to do moving forward till we did our assessment. So at the time they proposed to backfill it, we accepted it, and it was backfilled with slurry, but they preferred not to. By the time they did it, they had changed their mind and not wanted to backfill it. Hopefully that was not too confusing.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that in terms of the boulder, I know that it's important to your conversation that the geotech did state that while he did not encounter a boulder, that a boulder could be present. So if something could possibly be present, it would appear to me that you would need to prepare for that because it could be present according to what he testified before us. So I think that that's important information to be on the table. Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, and he also did provide evidence that he expected them because there were large shards of rock and they hit refusal during some of their sampling. So there was a good indication that boulders would potentially be expected. I just wanted to add one other thing. We've gotten into so many details here. I haven't added everything because there's just mountains of paperwork. But prior to starting task order 4 and getting the final cost proposal, because of the CMGC process that we had, SSW actually went out and did more excavations and soil analysis or soil investigations, I should say, in the river, in the LA River in particular. And they went down 10 feet at each of within the river bottom, as well as up near the Bent 6, which was one of the places they said they encountered boulders. So this was in May of 2015, well before we had a contract on package 4. And right near Bent 6, SSW identified large 3-foot plus boulder near the top of the hole. They encountered, they made 10 foot, and then the river layer, the rock layer collapsed to make the hole 8 feet across a few feet away, 2 to 3 feet large boulders, river rock could not get past 7 feet without taking up too much time. So although it wasn't part of our foundation report that was presented to the contractor, this information was made, was actually performed by the prime and made available. Their whole team knew that large boulders were found adjacent to Bent 6 where they would be doing drilling. So I just wanted to put it on the record too that in addition to our foundation report, SSW had their own soil information that indicated large boulders would be encountered.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Okay, so let's hear from Mr. Burrows, Mr. Bonita, however you all want to respond to the geotechnical expert from the city.
This is George Burrow.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Allen, or either our geotechnical expert, really just one or two questions. Any response regarding the boulder discussion that just took place about the number of boulders and whether the numbers applicable here today or not? And just your thoughts, what would be your response in response to what you heard? Microphone off?
How we go?
There we go.
All right, Julie Allen for the record. So the indication of the likely presence of boulders or the possibility of boulders, along with the additional investigation that SSW performed, was, in our opinion, well within what the contract indicated to them that they should be expecting. And in addition, with the risk register, they provided additional guarantee that if any boulders under 2 feet were found, that was going to be covered by their risk, and that they would be responsible for mitigating it. As far as what has been submitted to the city as evidence, we've seen pictures of maybe 6 rocks in one bent and maybe 2 in another, and I think I saw one boulder that had one dimension that was larger than 2 feet. The other dimension was smaller, so diameter of an oblong shape is a little difficult to figure out, but most every boulder that they've shown evidence to the city of was well under the 2 feet and covered by the risk register. Like I said, there was one that had a length that was potentially longer, and we don't know if that caused any problems with the project or not. So as a whole, with the information that was known, the information that was in the contract, as well as the risk register, we feel that the boulders that they encountered were definitely well within what they had been notified within the contract to be expecting and to manage.
Regarding the the timing, we discussed and this is a question more for, although don't sit down yet, Ms. Allen, Mr. Jordan, the questions regarding the timing requirements. Ms. Allen, you referenced those in the beginning of your presentation on the timing requirements. Were any of, for what is the subject of today's claim, were any of the timing requirements met?
No.
Okay.
They were not.
Mr. Jordan, with none of the timing requirements met, the city could take the procedural, for lack of a better term, response under the contract and deny the claims based on that, correct?
Yes, we could, but I think there's value in looking at the merits as well.
And has the city done so?
Yes.
On all of these?
I believe so, yes.
Regarding the claim, the contention that by the subcontractor that the city didn't, there were a number of these claims that the city just didn't investigate, we just said no right away. Was that, one, is that accurate? Two, if it is accurate, and I realize it may differ on various items, but if it is accurate, is it because of the timing that passed? And this is a compound question, I realize. And if the timing had passed, did we still address it technically anyway? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So I'll give an example so that you can kind of follow through. They would give a notice, it would be late, in writing that they found a potential differing site condition because they had settlement. So the way that the city would respond in that context is you need to define what you consider to be the differing site condition, and generally we would say notice must be given within the contract time. I can't guarantee that every single letter that we responded said, hey, you're 8 days late, something like that, but in general we would ask for more information. We don't see anything that's a differing site condition, but please let us know if something is identified as a differing site condition. So it wasn't rejected outright, it was more that they're not telling us anything that we can evaluate at this point. So at the point where they actually submit something that defines what they consider to be the differing site condition, then we can make comments on the merit of that particular issue. But just because they find something that's they encountered that doesn't go right, that doesn't mean there's a differing site condition. So we have to ask for more information in that.
If more information was received, would the Bureau of Engineering respond with, in essence, the technical response?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, any other, I don't have any further questions for Ms. Allen. Any other questions? Let me just, Mr. Jordan, this may be a question, but it's at least a statement to you. I recognize that we're here on whether or not there's any merit to these claims, and we've heard a significant amount. Well, let me ask this final. Ms. Allen, anything further you would like to add before I summarize from my perspective? Okay. We have heard differing and competing, sometimes opinions, sometimes admittedly opinions, which is fine. But our task today is to determine whether there is enough evidence presented by the subcontractor on whether or not there's merit to the claims that are being made, and if there is merit, then we move to the next step of determining what payment should be, depending on the claims. On each of these, and I'm going to break it down to the three that are that were listed. We've got boulders and I realize that these might be in differing order, but we kind of agreed earlier that it's the same three categories. Boulders encountered, expansion of lower Fernando formation soil, and access and railroad rights of way. I'm going to put my opinion on the record regarding each three, and any of my colleagues can do so as well, or we can formulate a motion therefrom. Access and railroad rights of way. That's hard to say fast. Access and railroad rights of way. I did not hear or see anything in the documents, including the contract language that was provided by the city and not disputed by the, I'm going to say the contractor, but I mean collectively the contractor and the subcontractor here, that would absolve the contractor of the responsibility that the contract requires regarding access in the railroad rights of way. I think the contract language is clear. I even had a discussion with the city attorney regarding the specific language related to what was required and what the contractor accepted. So I don't believe that there is enough information for us to determine that there's merit to that claim, such that we go back to make a determination as to what the monetary amount of that claim should be. Secondly, under the expansion of lower Fernando formation soil, we had differing positions and differing opinions, frankly, from both experts that we heard from today. And there's, again, to me, there's not enough information, or maybe that's not the best way to frame it. I don't think, and I'm a lawyer by trade, so I'm just going to have to use legal terms. And Ted, you can step in if I step out of line here. I don't feel like any burden of proof was met, even a lighter burden of proof by the contractor regarding the lower Fernando formation soil, in at least significant part by the response, as a result of the response from the city regarding what can cause the expansion of the clay and the movement of the soil to warrant a finding of merit based on the lower Fernando formation soil. Third, the boulders encountered. It was a helpful discussion that we had, albeit maybe frustrating at times for Commissioner Garcia and the respondent regarding trying to recognize the number of boulders encountered. But I think it demonstrated, again, a lack of meeting any type of burden of proof to demonstrate that a claim has merit regarding the the boulders. And I would also respond that the response by the city in providing the specific risk document and the risk accepted by the contractor regarding what may happen, and the contract language regarding what could occur regarding boulders, and the expert testimony regarding what is standard in the industry and what would be known versus not known for below grade with saturated versus unsaturated, that once again there is not a burden of proof that was established to warrant a determination that the claim itself has merit. So that's my attempt at a quick summary of the three issues that both sides agreed were the issues that we're hearing today on whether or not the claim has merit. Ted.
You asked me to step
Mr.
in,
Jordan.
so I will. Just for clarification, there's another issue I want to make sure gets captured in your discussion, and that's an allegation by Condon Johnson, and it's reflected in the Bureau's summary of the claim as well, which is a claim referred to as extra work directed by the city. Looking at Condon Johnson's summary of that element of the claim, directed to backfill an excavated shaft and extend pile length. Looking at the Bureau of Engineering's summary of that element, direction to backfill an excavated hole.
I've got it.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if what you said covered those specific
Not
issues.
yet.
Okay.
But that was a carve-out.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
and it
stop
was
talking
something that Commissioner Davis specifically referenced as
Okay.
well. So
My apologies.
no need to. So those three are the issues on merit regarding those three. Here's where I come in on the extra work directed, and Ms. Allen, I might have you to the podium on this item. You said that the city accepted the work that was provided regarding the slurry of the. Would you help me out? Finish it?
Using slurry to backfill the excavation.
The backfill slurry. The city accepted that work. Is that something, though, that the city requested or demanded?
I'll have to take you through a little bit sequential. So
Okay.
when there was first the settlement, it was suggested by the contractor, and the city was open to that. But by the time they actually did it, they didn't feel like they needed to do it anymore, and the city had already rejected the pile, and they basically said, we're offering a plan to do this, but they've said that they don't think that they need to do it, and the city accepted the plan. We never written directed, you must do this.
So you accepted the plan that they did not need to do it?
We accepted their plan to backfill it with the understanding that they thought they didn't need to do it anymore. They felt that they could just continue drilling, and we didn't agree that that was going to be appropriate because we didn't know the condition of the soil around the pile yet.
You did or did not?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I've got my colleagues talking to me.
Okay.
Let me just.
So originally they proposed to backfill it, and the city agreed that that was a good idea. But
City agreed what?
agreed it was a good idea to backfill the hole.
Yes, I'm with you so far.
Okay, but before they actually went ahead and did it, they said, never mind, we don't want to backfill it anymore. We'd prefer to just continue drilling and not backfill the hole.
And the city accepted that?
No,
The city did not accept that?
we did not accept that.
Okay.
We instead accepted their plan of backfilling the hole, but we didn't, in writing, either way, it was basically, no, you can't leave it open. We can't let you drill, we can't let you continue drilling because we don't know if the pile is going to have to be lengthened. We haven't done the investigation yet around the sides of the soil, so it's not a good idea to keep drilling, basically, at that point, until we understand the circumstances. And to allow them to move forward with the next hole and remove that casing and move on, we thought that it was appropriate for them to backfill the hole. But they didn't want to at that point. They were doing it kind of under protest.
Okay. And the grounds under which the city, under which the, excuse me, the grounds under which the Bureau of Engineering is recommending that we determine that there's no merit to their claim based on this extra work is what?
It's that we, at the time, hadn't done an investigation as to the source of the settlement, and ultimately determined that their own means and methods were the source of the settlement. So it was a mitigation for their improper means and methods.
It was caused by them. Okay. Thank you. Again, I would agree with you, but even if I weren't necessarily in agreement with you, I don't see enough here to warrant a determination that their claim has merit. I recognize that that may be taken up by another tribunal at another time, but I don't feel like a burden of proof has been met that warrants the use of taxpayer money to pay that claim based on what we have here today. And that would conclude my comments. Do you have anything else you want to? Okay. Commissioner Davis.
In terms of the boulders encountered, as stated earlier by me and through testimony, it was revealed that the geotech person indicated in the report, and it was acknowledged also by the subcontractor presenting complaints, that the boulders not encountered but could be present was stated in the report. To me, that clearly means that the geotech did not identify any, however, clearly stated that they could be present, which means in many ways that the subcontractor was called to be a Boy Scout, to be prepared, because it didn't say that boulders not encountered, absolutely not any. It said boulders not encountered but could be present. So to that degree, certainly the subcontractor would have to be prepared. It was a very inconclusive statement there. The other issue is access in railroads right-of-way. They were limited and caused a delay. Now, the mayor's office has been revealed by Commissioner Colosa, has been involved in terms of the city's effort to reach out to help to expedite our relationship with that agency. So it was just not founded that there has not been any effort whatsoever on behalf of the city to try to make sure that we could expedite our access to right-of-way and rail. And as it relates to the expansion of Lower Fernando Formation soil called C's casing, I've heard both testimonies. I would like to have probably a little more discussion among our commissioners as it relates to that particular item, as well as the extra work directed by the city. So I'd love to have discussions with the observation of my colleagues on the latter two issues that I have mentioned, and my two findings in the former statements are where I'm at in terms of boulder as well as to access railroad right-of-ways.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Davis. Commissioner Cabello.
President James, I call the question on this item.
Okay, any further discussion? So, Mr. Jordan?
Yeah, I'm sorry to belabor the extra work claim. Other elements that the Bureau did address is Condon Johnson's claim that the requirement to maintain a 10-foot fluid head was extra work. The Bureau stated in its report that that is simply a requirement. It's part of the contractual requirements for digging below groundwater table. Another claim that Condon Johnson raised was to maintain this soil plug. That relates to the, again, you can't dig below that.
Understood. But Commissioner Cabello just called the question.
Okay.
Unusual. So I'm looking to you this.
Then I have a question for the attorney.
So
You've indicated that you found no evidence that would meet approval.
Robert's rules, though.
Mr. Jordan, so that's a little unusual.
That's point of information.
All right. Mr. Jordan, go ahead.
Well, you've indicated in your discussion that you found that the contractor, or in this case the subcontractor, has not met its burden, or has not met a burden of proof to justify the merits of the claim.
Yes.
So I'm just saying that was the statement, and
she's called that
and
question.
she has called the question.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so procedurally, because we don't have a lot of hearings where we have called a question, procedurally, we vote on the calling of the question, which will, just so that the record is clear, and we are, what effect does that have, and just guide us through it?
Oops, sorry. Procedurally now, you would be voting on that. That would be the parliamentary procedures. They're not, while not strictly binding on the board, that would be typically how it would be done.
So we've never cut off a motion before. Does that in any way cut off a motion, or just cuts off discussion?
Well, it would cut off the discussion. I don't believe a motion has been made yet.
Right. Okay. So we're just cutting off discussion. All right. So, Dr. Campos, you want to take the roll on the discussion?
Absolutely. Just for clarification on the discussion, we will take the roll call. Would you like to consider each of the four items before you, or just consider the entire report before you as a denial? So what I'm hearing is 3 site conditions: the railroad and access right away; the second, the Lower Fernando soil formation; the third, the boulders encountered; and then the fourth would be the extra work. I can take roll call for each of the 4, whether this board would like to deny the claim on each of the 4 instances, or 2, we can take roll call for the entire 4 at the same time. Does that make sense?
Can I have a moment with
Sure.
President James? Okay, so Dr. Campos, I think technically, to be fair to my colleagues, and also to follow Robert's rules and follow the rules of decorum and follow the rules of the board, we first vote on whether or not to call the question, meaning whether or not to end discussion on this item. And then the next vote would be whether or not to vote on, or whether or not to deny the claim or vote on those in 4 separate motions. And if that, I would move that we call the question, and my second motion would be to take it up as one item to deny the claim. That's my motion. Those are my 2 motions in front of on the floor.
So let's go ahead and take the roll call for calling the question first, to put that on the table first. And then once that gets passed, then we will go ahead and consider any motions to consider the entire claim comprehensively as proposed by the Bureau of Engineering.
Yes, and for the second one, I would say unless there was an objection by my colleagues.
Great. So we'll take the roll call first for calling the question first.
Is there a second to that motion?
Is there a second to the motion to calling the question? Second by Commissioner Caloza.
Was that a second by you too on calling the question, Commissioner Davis?
Well, what are we calling for? The question?
The question on the 4 items that Mr. Jordan just went through.
Well, no,
my only thing is I had a question for the city attorney, so I don't know where that fits in or if it can, but yes, I go with the motion.
Right. Is that a second to the motion to call it for the question?
To be clear, Commissioner Davis, calling the question means ending discussions, meaning no more questions. That we would end discussion and then just vote after that. So I am moving to call the question. I just want to be fair and clear about what my motion is initially.
And just
Commissioner Davis, just for the record, would you like to be added to the second to that motion to stop all further discussions, or would you like to be removed? We will go ahead and remove that. So we do have a motion to call the question for no further discussion from Commissioner Cabello. We have a second by Commissioner Caloza. Is there any objection? Hearing none, we will go ahead and take the roll call to call the question.
I do want to make a statement, just as the person who's chaired this board for the last 6 years. The reason we have some discussion on this is It's the first time that we've had a motion to call the question that I can recall sitting here. So that's why on a hearing, and this hearing is somewhat unusual in and of itself as well, as was in testimony. So I just want that on the record. That's why we've had some discussion as to what procedurally it means and what effect it has. We've gotten that clear. You can call for your vote now.
We will now do the roll call. Again, this is for calling the question. No more further discussion on the item. If you can respond with a yay or a nay, Commissioner Garcia,
Yay.
Commissioner Cabello,
Yay.
Commissioner James,
Nay.
Commissioner Davis.
On calling the question, I vote no. Yeah.
Commissioner Davis, is that a yay or a nay? Can you speak into the mic, please, for me? Please? Nay. Commissioner Caloza.
Yay.
Great, that motion passes. We have 3 yays and we have 2 nays. Now, this board can consider putting a motion to consider the item before you, which is the Bureau of Engineering's claim to deny the entire claim.
I'll second that.
That's
Moved
the
by
motion.
Commissioner-
I move.
Moved by Commissioner Cabello, second by Commissioner James. We will also take a roll call for this item, just for the record. Commissioner Garcia,
I am denying the claim. Yes. Yay.
it's a yay.
I was trying to figure out which one.
Commissioner Cabello,
Yay.
Commissioner James,
Yay.
Commissioner Davis. I will take that as a yay. Commissioner Caloza,
Yay.
So that's...
motion passes unanimous.
Okay, then any objection to sending it forthwith? All right, thank you, everyone, for your participation, for your work on this, and for your patience with us towards the procedural aspect of this that we got through. Thank you. Dr. Campos, have we cleared the desk?
Yes, you have.
Then we are adjourned.